Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Jackson Thornfield, but everyone calls me Jack. I've been a forest ranger for 16 years now, and I've seen things in these West Virginia mountains that would make most folks pack up and move to the city. But I always had an explanation for everything. Animals acting strange, weather change coming, weird sounds in the woods, just the wind through the rocks. I never believed the old stories the mountain folk told about things living in the deep places. I should have listened. It was October 1967, and we'd been getting rain for 6 straight days. The kind of cold, driving rain that soaks through everything and makes your bones ache. I was 42 then, had been alone since a mining accident took my Sarah 3 years back. My 2 boys were grown and gone, so the Forest Service was pretty much my whole life. I specialized in cave rescue operations, had led 47 successful rescues over the years, even trained some Navy divers when they needed help with underwater cave systems. Point is, I knew every cave, every passage, every dangerous spot in the Monongahela National Forest. These caves were like my backyard. I could navigate them blindfolded. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. 4 graduate students from Virginia Tech had gone spelunking in the Seneca Rocks area 3 days ago and hadn't come back. The limestone cave system there runs about 12 miles underground. Plenty of places to get lost or trapped, especially with all this rain. The caves would be flooding, and hypothermia would kill them fast in that cold water. I grabbed my gear, the standard stuff we used back then. Carbide lamps, hemp ropes, basic radio equipment. Nothing fancy, but it had never let me down before. My partner, Dale Ashworth, met me at the trailhead. Dale was good people, steady and reliable. Been doing this almost as long as me. "What do you think, Jack?" he asked, looking up at the gray sky. "Cave-in?" "Maybe," I said, but something felt wrong already. "Let's go see what we're dealing with." The hike to the cave entrance took us through some of the prettiest country in West Virginia, even in the rain. Tall pines and oaks, moss-covered rocks, streams running high and fast. But as we got closer to the caves, I noticed the animals were acting strange. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Even the insects seemed quiet. When we found the students' vehicles, my blood went cold. Both cars sat in the parking area where they should be, but the doors had been torn clean off their hinges. Not pried off, torn off. The metal was twisted and bent like someone had grabbed those doors and ripped them away with impossible strength. But there were no signs of struggle in the mud around the cars. No footprints, no blood, nothing. "Jesus," Dale whispered. "What could do that?" I didn't answer because I didn't have an answer. Bears were strong, but not that strong. And bears didn't rip car doors off anyway. At the cave entrance, we found something even stranger. The students' climbing gear was there, expensive titanium hardware that could hold thousands of pounds. But it was twisted into spirals, like someone had taken solid metal and shaped it like clay. The climbing ropes were cut clean through, but the ends were melted, not cut. "Jack," Dale said, his voice tight, "maybe we should call this in. Get more people out here." I was thinking the same thing, but those kids had been missing for 3 days. If they were still alive, we didn't have time to wait for backup. Every hour counted in a cave rescue. I checked my equipment one more time and started setting up the rappelling gear. My carbide lamp flickered to life, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls. The radio crackled with static. "I'm going down," I told Dale. "You stay up here above and coordinate if anyone else shows up." The cave mouth yawned open like a hungry throat, and for the first time in my career I hesitated at the edge. Something deep in my gut was screaming at me to turn around and walk away. I should have listened to that voice. The rappel down was routine at first, 200 feet of familiar limestone walls and narrow passages. But as I descended, I noticed the temperature rising. Cave systems in this area stayed at a constant 52 degrees year-round. My thermometer was reading 85 degrees and climbing. That's when I found the first student's gear. Emily Patterson's backpack, headlamp, and climbing harness were arranged in a perfect circle on a narrow ledge. Not dropped or scattered like you'd expect from someone in trouble. Arranged, like someone had carefully placed each item exactly where they wanted it. Her wallet was there too, opened to her student ID. Emily Patterson, 23 years old, graduate student in geology. She had a pretty smile in the photo. I'd seen too many of those photos over the years, young people with their whole lives ahead of them before the mountains claimed them. But Emily's gear wasn't damaged or torn like the equipment at the surface. It was just waiting. I keyed my radio. "Dale, you copy?" Static answered me, then something that might have been whispers. I tried again, but got the same thing. White noise and what sounded like voices too far away to understand. My carbide lamp started acting up too. The flame turned from its normal yellow to a strange blue-green color, and the light seemed dimmer somehow. I had backup batteries for my electric flashlight, but something told me to save them. The passage opened up into a larger chamber, and that's where I saw something that made my hands shake. Claw marks, gouged deep into solid limestone, 6 inches deep in some places. The pattern was wrong for any animal I knew. Too wide, too long. The gouges suggested something with claws, 12 feet across, but that was impossible. Nothing that big lived in these caves, I thought. Load the marks deeper into the chamber and found more of the students' equipment, all arranged in the same careful patterns. David Chen's gear, Michael Torres's climbing hardware, Jessica Walsh's pack. But no bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle. The chamber stretched away into darkness beyond my lamp's reach. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, but it sounded wrong. Too rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. The walls around me were covered in formations I'd never seen before, twisted limestone shapes that looked almost organic. That's when I heard the voice. "Help! Me!" It was coming from the far wall of the chamber. Weak, barely a whisper, but definitely human. I rushed toward the sound, my lamp casting wild shadows on the cave walls. Emily Patterson was there, but she wasn't there the way a person should be. She was embedded in the cave wall itself, her body somehow fused with the limestone. Only her face and one arm were still visible, still human. The rest of her was becoming part of the rock, her skin taking on the gray-white color of the cave walls. Her eyes tracked to me as I approached, wide with terror and pain. "Please," she whispered, her voice echoing strangely. "It's changing me. I can feel myself becoming stone." I reached for her visible hand, but stopped when I saw her fingers. They were hardening, crystallizing, tiny mineral formations growing from her fingernails. But she was still alive, still conscious. "What did this to you?" I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. Before she could respond, the temperature in the chamber dropped 20 degrees in an instant. My breath came out in visible puffs, and frost began forming on the cave walls. That's when I saw it. The thing that had been hunting the students. It dropped from the ceiling like a nightmare made real. 15 feet tall with leathery wings that scraped against the chamber walls. Its body was humanoid but wrong. Too long, too thin, covered in what looked like living stone. Its arms ended in claws that could carve limestone like butter. But the worst part was its face. Almost human, but ancient beyond measure. Eyes like black holes that seemed to pull light into them. When it smiled, I saw teeth made of crystallized minerals. The creature landed silently despite its size, and when it spoke, its voice came from everywhere at once. The walls, the ceiling, the floor itself. "Another trespasser," it said, the words rumbling through the limestone around us. Good. I was still hungry. I grabbed for my radio, but it was just screaming static now. The creature moved toward me with fluid grace, those terrible claws scraping sparks from the stone floor. Emily Patterson's eyes found mine one last time. "Run," she whispered, as the limestone claimed the rest of her face. I ran. I stumbled through passages I thought I knew, but the cave system had changed. Tunnels led to chambers that shouldn't exist. Passages I'd mapped years ago now opened onto vast underground spaces that stretched beyond my light. Behind me, I could hear the creature moving. Not footsteps, something worse. The sound of stone grinding against stone, like the cave itself was shifting and flowing. I found David Chen in the next chamber. He was standing upright, but his legs were gone, replaced by a column of flowstone that connected him to the cave floor. His torso was still human, but calcified patches spread across his skin like some terrible disease. When he saw me, he tried to speak, but the words came out wrong, distorted. "It talks to us," he managed, his voice echoing like it came from deep underground. "Tells us about the Earth, how it was formed, how long it's been waiting." "Waiting for what?" I asked, though I was already backing away. David's eyes were changing, becoming cloudy like quartz. "For us to come deep enough," he said. "We're trespassers in its domain. It's been here since the mountains were young," the creature's votum. Ice boomed through the chamber. "David understands now. He's becoming part of something greater, something eternal." David's mouth moved, but the creature's words came out. "Your kind thinks you own the surface, but the deep places are mine. I am the stone. I am the darkness between stones. I am the hunger that eats light." I turned and ran again, but the passages kept changing. Every route I tried led me deeper instead of up toward the surface. The creature was hurting me, driving me toward something. In the third chamber, I found Michael Torres, or what was left of him. He hung from the ceiling like a living stalactite, his body stretched and twisted into crystalline formations. But his eyes were still human, still aware, still terrified. "Jack," he whispered when he saw me, "it doesn't kill us. It keeps us. Forever." The formations around Michael pulsed with a sick inner light, and I realized they weren't natural cave formations at all. They were people. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. All the cavers and spelunkers who had gone missing in these mountains over the years. All still alive, all still conscious, all part of the creature now. "My name is Michael Torres," he said, but his voice was layered now, like multiple people speaking at once. "I am David Chen. I am Emily Patterson. I am Thomas Wright from 1952. I am Mary Henderson from 1961. We are the voice of stone. We are the memory of deep places." The creature's laughter shook dust from the ceiling. "Do you understand now, Ranger?" it said. "You cannot save them because they are part of me, and soon you will be too." That's when Dale's voice crackled through my radio, weak and distorted, but unmistakably him. "Jack, something's wrong up here. The trees, they're turning to stone." The signal cut to static. I tried every passage I could find, but they all led deeper into the mountain. The creature was playing with me, letting me exhaust myself while it stayed just out of sight. Every chamber I entered had more victims, more of the missing cavers from over the years. In the largest chamber yet, I found Jessica Walsh. She was the worst of all. The creature had hollowed her out and was using her body as some kind of nest. Tiny stone formations grew from her skin like eggs, each one pulsing with that same sick light. She was still alive, still aware, but when she tried to speak, only the creature's voice came out. "She carries my offspring now," it said through Jessica's mouth. "Soon they will be ready to spread to other cave systems, other mountains. Your surface world will learn to fear the deep places again." That's when I saw what had happened to Dale. My partner stood at the chamber entrance, but his skin was already turning gray. Stone formations sprouted from his fingers and toes. He looked at me with eyes that were slowly becoming mineral, and smiled a terrible smile. "Jack," he said in his own voice, but underneath it was something else, something ancient and hungry. "It doesn't hurt after a while. You just become part of something bigger." Dale raised his hand toward me, and I saw the stone growth spreading up his arm like cancer. "Please," he whispered, and for a moment his real voice broke through. Kill me, before it's too late, before I become like them. I had my rock hammer on my belt, standard cave rescue equipment. I'd never used it as a weapon before. I'm sorry, Dale, I said. The sound echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. The creature's roar shook the entire cave system. Rocks fell from the ceiling as its rage echoed through every passage and chamber. But Dale was free now, free from whatever horrible existence the thing had planned for him. You will pay for that, trespasser, the creature snarled, and now it wasn't hiding anymore. It flowed out of the cave walls themselves, revealing its true nature. The creature wasn't just living in the cave system, it was the cave system. Every passage, every chamber, or every limestone formation was part of its body. The missing cavers weren't just trapped inside it, they were part of its living tissue now. I am the mountain's hunger, it said, its voice coming from everywhere at once. I am the darkness that existed before your sun. I have fed on your kind for millennia, and I will feed long after your cities have crumbled to dust. The walls around me began to close in, the limestone flowing like liquid. My carbide lamp flickered and died, leaving me with only my backup flashlight. In its beam, I could see faces in the stone. Hundreds of victims over the centuries, all still conscious, all still trapped. Some of them were dressed in old-fashioned clothes. Native Americans in traditional dress, early settlers in rough homespun, modern cavers in technical gear. All of them tried to speak, but only the creature's voice emerged. Your Cherokee ancestors knew to fear me, it said through a dozen mouths at once. They called me the stone spirit, the hunger that walks in deep places. They made offerings to keep me sleeping. But your people forgot the old warnings. The ceiling pressed down toward my head. Soon there would be nowhere left to run. That's when I remembered something from my Navy diving training. Emergency procedures when equipment failed underwater. Sometimes the only thing that could save you was your own body's chemistry. The creature had been absorbing the students slowly, taking days to complete the transformation. That meant it was vulnerable during the process. And if it was made of limestone, there was one thing that could hurt it: acid. I'd been scared out of my mind for hours, running on pure adrenaline and terror. My stomach was churning with fear and exhaustion. So I did something that went against every instinct I had. I made myself throw up. The stomach acid splashed against the nearest wall formation, and mud. The creature's scream nearly burst my eardrums. Where the acid hit, the limestone bubbled and dissolved, releasing a cloud of acrid steam. The pressure around me eased as the creature recoiled in pain. What? What are you doing? It gasped, its voice losing some of its otherworldly power. I forced myself to vomit again, aiming for the formations that looked most like faces. Each splash of acid freed another trapped soul, their final screams echoing through the chamber as decades of imprisonment ended. The creature thrashed in agony, the entire cave system convulsing around me. Passages collapsed as it lost control of its form. I could feel tons of rock shifting overhead, but the acid was working. Wherever it hit, the creature's stone flesh dissolved, revealing the true extent of its body. Miles of passages, hundreds of chambers, all connected tissue of this ancient horror. I stumbled toward what looked like the creature's core, a massive heart-shaped formation in the center of the chamber. It pulsed with that sick inner light, and I could see Dale's face trapped inside it, along with Emily and David and Michael and Jessica. With my last bit of strength, I forced up everything left in my stomach. The acid hit the heart formation dead center. The creature's death scream shook the mountain. Every passage, every chamber, every limestone formation that was part of its body began to collapse at once. The ancient horror that had fed on human life for millennia was finally dying. But it was taking the entire cave system with it. I ran through collapsing passages as thousands of tons of rock crashed around me. My flashlight beam danced crazily as I stumbled over fallen stones and squeezed through gaps that were closing by the second. Behind me, I could hear the creature's final words, spoken through the mouths of all its victims at once. Others will come. The deep places call to your kind, and in the deep places, we are waiting. I saw daylight ahead, a crack in the rock where the cave entrance used to be. The opening was getting smaller as the mountain settled, but it was still big enough for a man. I dove through just as the last of the cave system collapsed behind me. I woke up 3 days later in the Charleston hospital. The doctors said a search team found me unconscious at the base of Seneca Rocks, covered in limestone dust and mineral deposits. They couldn't explain the calcium formations that had started growing in my joints, or why my body showed 15% higher mineral content than normal. The official report listed the students' deaths as a cave-in during the flooding. Bodies unrecoverable due to unstable geological conditions. Dale Ashworth was listed as a victim of the same cave-in. The twisted car doors were explained as damage from falling rocks. I never corrected the record. I retired from the Forest Service immediately and took a job doing surface maintenance work. Never went underground again, not even to fix a broken water pipe in a basement. The nightmares started right away. Dreams of stone faces calling my name, of passages that led deeper and deeper into the earth, of things that moved in the spaces between rocks. The calcium deposits in my body kept growing. My doctor called it an unusual metabolic condition and prescribed treatments that didn't work. I knew better. Part of that creature was still in me, would always be in me. A reminder of what lived in the deep places. I established new protocols for cave safety in the National Forest. Any cave system showing geological instability got sealed immediately. I made sure no one would accidentally stumble into another nest of those things, because I knew they were still out there. 6 months after the incident, I met with some Cherokee elders from the reservation. They weren't surprised by my story. Their grandparents had told them about the stone spirits, about the proper rituals to keep them sleeping in the deep places. You or people forgot the old ways, one elder told me. Forgot that some places are not meant for human feet. The mountain spirits grow hungry when they are ignored too long. He taught me the appeasement rituals, offerings of tobacco and cornmeal left at cave entrances, prayers spoken in the old language, warnings carved in stone to keep others away. I still do those rituals. Every month I visit the sealed entrances and leave the proper offerings. The nightmares are less frequent now, and the calcium deposits have stopped growing. But sometimes, on rainy October nights like that one in 1967, I can feel something stirring deep underground, something that remembers the taste of human fear, something that's patient enough to wait decades for the next group of explorers to venture too far from the surface. So let me give you some advice, friend. If you're the type who likes to explore caves, who gets excited about spelunking and underground adventures, remember this story. Remember that some places in these old mountains have been hungry since before humans walked the earth. And whatever you do, never enter an Appalachian cave alone, especially during the rain season. The hollows keep their secrets, but sometimes those secrets keep you too. My name is Rebecca Foxworth, but everyone calls me Becky. I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 11 years now, and I've seen things that would make most people quit their jobs. But I keep coming back because of the children. You see, I have a special job here. While other rangers worry about bears and hiking accidents, I focus on families and kids. I speak Cherokee, I know child psychology, and I've rescued 89 lost children over the years. Not one death on my watch. That's something I'm proud of, something that keeps me going when the nightmares come. The nightmares started when I was 8. My little sister Emma disappeared during a family camping trip. 1 minute she was picking wildflowers, the next she was gone. We never found her. That's why I do what I do. Every rescued child is Emma coming home safe. It was August 1974 and the heat was killing us. 97 degrees in the shade and families were dropping like flies from dehydration. I'd already helped 3 kids with heat stroke that week, but the Hartwell family insisted on camping near Cataract Falls, said their kids loved playing in the water. The children will be fine, Mrs. Hartwell told me as I checked their campsite. We're keeping a close eye on them. Tommy Hartwell was 6, blonde hair and bright blue eyes. He reminded me of Emma. His parents had brought along 2 other families. The Mitchells with their 7-year-old Sarah, and the Garretts with 8-year-old Bobby. All 3 kids were fair-skinned and light-haired, the kind that burn easy in mountain sun. "Make sure they stay hydrated," I warned. "This heat can kill a child in hours." The parents nodded, but I could see they weren't taking it seriously. City folks never do. They think the mountains are like a big playground, safe and controlled. They don't understand that these hills have been here for millions of years, and they don't care about human schedules or comfort. I left them setting up camp near the rhododendron thickets. The bushes grew thick there, creating little green rooms where kids could play house. It looked innocent enough, but something felt wrong. The birds were too quiet, the air was too still. Even the creek seemed to whisper warnings. That evening, I was updating my reports when the radio crackled to life. "Ranger Foxworth, we need you at Cataract Falls. 3 children missing." My stomach dropped. I grabbed my gear and drove up the mountain road, praying it was just kids wandering off to explore. It happens all the time. Kids see a butterfly or a pretty rock and forget everything else. But when I arrived at the campsite, I knew this was different. The parents were frantic. Mrs. Mitchell was crying so hard she couldn't speak. Mr. Garrett kept running in circles, calling Bobby's name until his voice gave out. "They were right here," Mr. Hartwell kept saying, "playing in that little clearing by the water. We were watching them. We were watching." I've heard those words before. Every parent says the same thing. They were watching. They were careful. It happened so fast. "How long have they been gone?" I asked. 2 hours, Mrs. Hartwell sobbed. "Maybe 3. We searched everywhere. We walked 2 miles in every direction." I felt that familiar tightness in my chest. 3 hours in this heat without water could be deadly, but I pushed down the panic. I had a job to do. "Show me where you last saw them." They led me to a small clearing surrounded by thick rhododendrons. The ground was soft dirt, perfect for showing footprints. And there were prints, small sneakers running in circles, playing some kind of game. But then the prints just stopped. In the center of the clearing sat 3 pairs of shoes. Tommy's red sneakers, Sarah's white sandals, Bobby's high, king boots. They were arranged in a perfect circle around a ring of mushrooms that seemed to glow in the fading light. "Were these mushrooms here before?" I asked. The parents looked at each other. "I don't think so," Mr. Mitchell said slowly. The kids were playing on grass, regular grass. I knelt down and studied the scene. The shoes were placed carefully, almost ceremonially. No footprints led away from them. It was like the children had simply vanished into thin air. And that's when I felt it, a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The temperature around the mushroom circle was at least 20 degrees colder than the rest of the clearing, in August, in 97-degree heat. I stood up and called for backup. Randy Morrison arrived an hour later with the tracking dogs. Randy's been my partner for 5 years, and those dogs have never failed to find a trail. They can track a mouse through a thunderstorm. But when we brought them to the clearing, something was wrong. The dogs wouldn't enter the mushroom circle. They whined and backed away, hair standing up on their necks. Rex, our best bloodhound, took one sniff of Tommy's shoes and started howling like something was hurting him. "What's got into them?" Randy asked, pulling at Rex's leash. I didn't answer. I was staring at the mushrooms. They were glowing brighter now that the sun was setting, and I could swear I heard something. Laughter. Children's laughter, faint and far away. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. Randy stopped tugging on the leash and listened. The laughter came again, echoing from impossible directions. It seemed to come from underground, from the trees, from the air itself. "Kids playing somewhere," Randy said, but his voice was uncertain. "Maybe they're hiding." We spent the next hour searching every inch of the area. The rhododendron thickets were thick, but not thick enough to hide 3 children. We found nothing. No tracks, no disturbed vegetation, no signs of struggle. As darkness fell, we set up floodlights around the clearing. The parents huddled by our camp stove, drinking coffee and jumping at every sound. Mrs. Mitchell kept staring at the mushroom circle like it might give up its secrets. "There's something you should know," she said quietly. Sarah was afraid of those mushrooms. She wouldn't go near them when we first arrived. Said they looked like fairy rings. Fairy rings? I asked. You know, the old stories, circles of mushrooms where fairies dance. Sarah's grandmother used to tell her tales about children who played in fairy rings and never came home. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. I need to make a phone call, I said. I drove down to the ranger station and called Joseph Swimmer, a Cherokee elder who lived near the park. Joseph was in his 70s, a keeper of the old stories. If anyone would know about fairy rings and missing children, it would be him. Becky, he said when he heard my voice, you're calling about the Nunahai. I hadn't told him why I was calling. The what? Nunahai, the immortal children. They appear in fairy rings when the moon is dark. They look for playmates. Joseph, I need facts, not stories. These are facts, child. My grandfather told me about them. His grandfather before him. The Nunahai have been stealing children from these mountains for centuries. Stealing them where? To the place underneath. The eternal summer land where children never grow old, never get sick, never die. But they never see their families again either. I felt sick. How many children? In my lifetime? Maybe 10 or 12 that I know of. But my family has kept count for generations. 47 children have disappeared near fairy rings in the past 100 years. All of them blonde, blue-eyed. The Nunahai prefer children who look like them. My hands were shaking. Is there a way to get them back? The old stories say yes, but the cost is high. And you have to find Tututsaz, him before the transformation is complete. What transformation? Human children become Nunahai children. Once that happens, they don't want to come home. They don't remember home. When I got back to the clearing, Randy was standing by the mushroom circle with a strange look on his face. Becky, he said slowly, I saw them. Saw who? The kids. They were right here, playing with other children. I counted 6 or 7 kids total. They were laughing and running around the mushrooms. Where are they now? Randy looked confused. I don't know. I blinked, and they were gone. But I heard them clearly. Tommy was calling for his mom. I looked at the mushroom circle. The glow was stronger now, pulsing like a heartbeat. And there, just for a second, I saw them too. 3 familiar children playing with 4 others I didn't recognize. The unknown children were beautiful. Perfect golden hair, bright eyes, flawless skin. They looked like they'd stepped out of a painting. But something was wrong with their shadows. In the floodlight, all the children cast shadows except the 4 I didn't recognize. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped toward the circle. Becky, don't, Randy warned. But I had to know. I had to see. The moment my foot crossed into the mushroom ring, the world changed. The clearing wasn't a clearing anymore. I stood in a vast meadow filled with wildflowers under a sky that couldn't decide if it was day or night. The air smelled like spring and summer and childhood all mixed together. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear children laughing and playing. Welcome, Rebecca. I spun around. A boy stood behind me, maybe 10 years old, with golden hair and eyes like green glass. He was beautiful, but in a way that made my skin crawl. Too perfect. Too bright. We've been waiting for you, the boy said. His voice echoed strangely, like it was coming from underwater. Where are the children? Where are Tommy, Sarah, and Bobby? The boy smiled. They're playing. They're happy. They're safe. I want to see them. Of course you do. Follow me. He turned and walked across the meadow, his feet barely touching the ground. I followed, my ranger training screaming at me to be careful, to watch for danger. But what could I do? 3 children were counting on me. We walked for what felt like hours, though the light never changed. The meadow stretched on forever, filled with impossible flowers and trees that seemed to whisper my name. I saw movement in my peripheral vision, other children playing games I didn't recognize, singing songs in languages I'd never heard. How long have you been here? I asked the boy. Time is different here, he said. A day, a year, a century, it's all the same. We don't age. We don't get sick. We don't die. Don't you miss your families? The boy stopped and looked at me with those unsettling green eyes. What families? We've always been here. We've always been together. But I saw something flicker across his face. Confusion. Pain. Like he was trying to remember something important but couldn't quite grasp it. We crested a small hill, and there they were. Tommy, Sarah, and Bobby sat in a circle with 6 other children playing some kind of clapping game. They looked happy, laughing and singing. But something was wrong. Tommy's fingernails were darker than they should be, almost bark-like. Sarah's eyes had taken on a greenish tint, and when she spoke, the words were Cherokee, a language she'd never learned. Bobby's skin had a faint glow to it, and when he jumped up to catch a butterfly, he stayed in the air a little too long. What's happening to them? I demanded. They're becoming like us, the golden-haired boy said. Soon they'll forget the sadness of the human world. They'll forget death and pain and loneliness. Isn't that wonderful? I ran toward the children, shouting their names. Tommy looked up and smiled. Miss Becky, look what we learned. He clapped his hands and sparks of light danced between his fingers. Tommy, we need to go home. Your parents are worried sick. His smile faltered. Parents? Your mom and dad, they're looking for you. Tommy's face scrunched up, like he was trying to solve a difficult puzzle. I think I remember, but it feels like a dream, like something that happened to someone else. Sarah giggled and said something in Cherokee. The other children laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. What did she say? I asked the golden-haired boy. She said the old woman smells like fear and sadness. She asked why you would want to take them back to a place where children cry. My heart was breaking. Sarah's eyes were completely green now, and when she looked at me, I saw no recognition at all. Sarah, honey, it's me, Ranger Becky. Remember? I helped you find your way back to camp yesterday when you got lost picking berries. Sarah tilted her head like a curious bird. I don't pick berries, she said in perfect Cherokee. I eat starlight and drink morning dew. That's when I heard Randy's voice, faint and far away. Becky, where are you? I turned toward the sound and saw him stumbling across the meadow, looking dazed and confused. But something was happening to him. With each step, he looked younger. His gray hair was turning brown. The lines around his eyes were smoothing out. Randy, don't come any closer, I shouted. But it was too late. He reached the circle of children and sat down heavily, breathing hard. Strangest thing, he said, but his voice was higher than before. I stepped into that mushroom ring looking for you, and suddenly I was here. How long have we been gone? I don't know, I said. But I had a terrible feeling it had been much longer than it felt. More children appeared from the meadow, dozens of them, all beautiful, all perfect, all with that same unsettling glow. I realized these must be the other missing children Joseph had told me about. 47 children lost over 100 years, all transformed into these eternal fairy creatures. Why children? I sked the golden-haired boy. Why do you take children? Because children know how to play, he said simply. Adults forget. They worry about time and money and death. Children live in the moment. They believe in magic. Randy was getting younger by the minute. His clothes hung loose on his shrinking frame. He was laughing at something Bobby had said, his adult concerns melting away like ice in summer. Please, I begged, let them go. Let them grow up. Let them live their lives. The golden-haired boy shook his head sadly. They are living. They're living forever. No sickness, no pain, no death. What more could any parent want for their child? A choice, I said. The choice to make their own decisions, to fall in love, to have children of their own, to experience everything life has to offer, good and bad. But why would anyone choose sadness? I thought about my sister Emma, about all the children I'd rescued over the years, about the parents waiting back in the real world. Because sadness makes the joy more precious, I said. Because growing up means becoming who you're meant to be. Because love only matters if you can lose it. The boy considered this, his perfect face troubled. Around us, the eternal children played their endless games, frozen in a moment that would never end. And that's when I felt it in my pocket, the weight of my belt buckle, made of old iron. My grandfather's buckle, passed down through generations of mountain folk who knew the old stories. The iron was burning hot against my leg. I pulled out my iron belt buckle, and the effect was immediate. The golden-haired boy hissed and stepped back, shielding his eyes. All around us, the eternal children stopped playing and stared at the buckle with fear and confusion. Cold iron, I whispered, remembering Joseph's words. You can't stand cold iron. Put it away, the boy pleaded. It hurts us. It burns. But I held it higher, and the buckle grew hotter in my hand. The impossible meadow flickered around us like a TV with bad reception. For a moment, I could see through to the real world, the mushroom circle, the floodlights, the worried parents. Tommy? Sarah? Bobby? I called. Look at this. Remember this? Tommy looked at the iron buckle and blinked hard. My dad has one like that. He wears it with his work clothes. That's right. Your dad is waiting for you. Your mom is crying because she's scared you're hurt. Tommy's bark-like fingernails began to fade back to normal. The magic was weakening around him. But Sarah only laughed and spoke more Cherokee words. She was too far gone, too changed. Her transformation was nearly complete. Bobby was somewhere in between. His skin still glowed, but his feet touched the ground now. I remember camping, he said slowly. I remember s'mores, but it feels like a long time ago. Randy was now about 12 years old and getting younger by the minute. He was giggling at everything, his adult memories fading like photographs in sunlight. We have to go, I told the children. Now, before it's too late. I pulled out my camping gear, searching for more iron. My knife had an iron blade. My compass had iron components. I arranged them in a circle around Tommy and Bobby, and the boys seemed to wake up a little more. It hurts, Sarah said, but now she was speaking English again. The metal hurts my eyes. The golden-haired boy was backing away, and the other eternal children were retreating too. But I could see anger replacing fear on their perfect faces. You can't take them, the boy said. They belong here now. They're ours. They're not yours, I said firmly. They're children, with families who love them. They have lives to live. We love them too. We'll love them forever. But you can't let them grow. You can't let them choose. More eternal children were gathering around us now, dozens of them, and their beauty was becoming terrible. Their eyes were too bright, their smiles too wide. They moved, like wolves circling prey. Becky, Tommy whispered, I want to go home. I want my mom. That's when the eternal children attacked. They couldn't touch the iron directly, but they swarmed around us, creating whirlwinds of flower petals and singing in voices that made my head spin. They were trying to confuse us, to make us drop the iron and forget why we came. Randy, now about 8 years old, started to wander toward them. Randy, no! I grabbed his shirt and pulled him back into the iron circle. But they want to play, he said in a little boy's voice. They look fun. Sarah was fighting the magic now, tears streaming down her green-tinted eyes. I remember Mom reading me stories, she sobbed. I remember my room with the pink walls. That's it, honey. Hold on to those memories. The iron was burning my hands now, but I didn't let go. I could feel the fairy realm fighting me, trying to pull the children back into eternal childhood. There's only one way out, I realized. We have to all leave together, or the realm won't let any of us go. I looked at the dozens of eternal children surrounding us. 47 lost kids, plus however many had been taken before people started counting, all of them trapped in this beautiful prison. Come with us, I called to them. All of you. You can grow up. You can go home. But the golden-haired boy shook his head. We don't remember home. This is all we know. And I saw the truth in his ancient young eyes. Some of them had been here so long, they truly were more fairy than human now. The transformation was complete. They couldn't leave even if they wanted to. But maybe some of the newer ones. "If you remember your real name," I shouted. "If you remember your family, step into the circle." 3 children broke away from the group and stumbled toward us. They looked confused and scared, like they were waking up from a long dream. The golden-haired boy screamed in rage, "No, you belong here! You're safe here!" But the iron circle was growing stronger. Reality was bleeding through the fairy realm, showing cracks in the eternal summer sky. "Everyone hold hands," I ordered. "Don't let go no matter what happens." We formed a chain. Me, Tommy, Bobby, Sarah, young Randy, and the 3 children who'd chosen to remember. The iron circle began to spin around us, faster and faster, until the meadow became a blur of impossible colors. The eternal children were chanting now, their voices rising in a song of loss and longing. They knew they were losing playmates, maybe forever. The last thing I saw was the golden-haired boy reaching out to us, tears like diamonds on his perfect cheeks. "Don't leave us alone," he whispered. And then we were falling back into the real world. We hit the ground hard in the mushroom circle, gasping and choking on normal air. The floodlights were blazing and I could hear the parents screaming our names. "Tommy, Sarah, Bobby!" The children were unconscious but breathing. Randy was still 8 years old, curled up like a sleeping child. The 3 other kids we'd brought back were teenagers now, though they'd been taken as small children decades ago. It had been 4 days since the children disappeared, though it felt like 4 hours to us. 4 days of frantic searching, media coverage, search and rescue teams from 3 states. The paramedics rushed in and loaded the children into ambulances. They were dehydrated and confused, but alive. As they checked Tommy's vitals, I saw the paramedic frown at his blood work results. "Cellular anomalies," he muttered. "Enhanced healing factors. I've never seen anything like it." Sarah was speaking both Cherokee and English now, switching back and forth like she was translating for invisible friends. Bobby's skin still had that faint glow, though it was fading. The 3 older children we'd rescued were taken to a special facility. They had no identification, no records of existence. One of them remembered Baj, being taken from a campground in 1962. Another thought her name might be Linda, but she wasn't sure. Randy aged back to normal over the next week. Though he never quite remembered what happened in the fairy realm, he just knew he'd had the most wonderful dreams about being a child again. I filed my official report. Children found in remote ravine, dehydrated but alive. Ranger Morrison suffered temporary amnesia due to head injury during search. 3 unidentified individuals require medical attention and psychiatric evaluation. The real report, the one I keep locked in my desk, tells the truth. Sarah's parents never got their daughter back. Not really. Oh, she looked like Sarah and sounded like Sarah most of the time. But sometimes I'd catch her talking to invisible friends in Cherokee or see her arrange her toys in perfect fairy rings. The transformation had left marks that never fully faded. Tommy recovered the best. The iron had worked quickly on him, reversing most of the changes. But sometimes, on camping trips, I'd see him staring at mushroom circles with a longing that broke my heart. Bobby's parents moved away from the mountains. They said the altitude bothered his asthma, but I knew better. They'd seen the way he floated half an inch off his bed while sleeping. I never told Joseph Swimmer about the 3 children we'd rescued. He had enough guilt about the ones who'd been lost over the years, but I did ask him to help me place iron fence posts around all the known fairy ring sites in the park. Iron won't stop them, he warned me. It will only slow them down. Then I'll keep watching, I said. And I have. For 47 years now, I've specialized in missing children cases. I carry iron tools in my pack, iron jewelry on my body, iron filings in my pockets. I've prevented 23 more Nunahai abductions over the decades, though most people think I'm just good at finding lost kids. Randy retired in 1995, never knowing why he sometimes woke up from dreams of eternal summer with tears on his cheeks. I stayed until they forced me to retire. At 70, then kept coming back as a volunteer. The mushroom circle at Cataract Falls still appears sometimes, especially during the dark of the moon. Sometimes I see children playing there, beautiful, perfect children who cast no shadows. They wave at me sadly, like old friends saying goodbye. I wave back and I whisper a promise. I'm still watching. I'm still here. Because somewhere in that realm of eternal summer, the golden-haired boy is still waiting for new playmates, still lonely, still hungry for the laughter of children who don't yet know that growing up is a gift, not a curse. And I'll be here to make sure he stays hungry. If you're ever camping in the Smokies with your children, remember this story. Keep some iron in your pocket, a nail, a key, a belt buckle passed down from your grandfather. Watch for mushroom circles that appear overnight. Listen for children's laughter that seems to come from nowhere. And if your child ever says they want to play with the pretty children in the fairy ring, pick them up and run. Run fast and don't look back. Because the mountain's hungry children are always watching, always waiting, always hoping that this time you'll let your guard down just long enough for them to steal another playmate for their endless games. My name is Rebecca Foxworth, and I've been protecting children from the Nunahai for 47 years. This is my story. This is my warning. And this is why I'll never stop watching the mushroom circles bloom in the dark of the moon. My name is Luther Ashford, but everyone calls me Luke. I've been a ranger in Jefferson National Forest for 14 years now, and I've seen things that would make most folks pack up and move to the city. Bears that weigh 600 pounds. Mountain lions that can take down a full-grown deer in seconds. Hunters who get lost and do stupid things that nearly get them killed. But I'm good at what I do. Real good. In my time here, I've tracked 156 bears and 78 mountain lions. I know how they think, how they move, how they kill. Used to be Army Rangers before this. Different kind of ranger, but the skills carry over. Tracking. Staying calm when things go bad. Knowing the difference between what's dangerous and what's just scary. I'm 39 now, live alone in a cabin about 10 miles from the main station. Divorced 3 years back. Sarah said I loved these mountains more than I loved her. Maybe she was right. After she left, I stopped trying to fight it. The forest doesn't lie to you. It doesn't change its mind or ask for things you can't give. It just is what it is. November 1981 was when everything changed. The leaves had mostly fallen, and we'd gotten our first snow early that year. Hunting season was in full swing, which meant my radio never stopped crackling with calls about lost hunters, illegal camps, and folks taking shots at things they shouldn't. That's when Jim Bradshaw came stumbling into the ranger station, white as a sheet and shaking like a leaf. "Luke," he said, barely able to get the words out. "You gotta come see this. Up on Backbone Ridge. Something killed a whole bunch of deer, but it ain't like nothing I ever seen." Jim's been hunting these woods for 20 years. He's not the type to get spooked by a bear or even a big cat, but he looked like he'd seen a ghost. "What kind of something?" I asked, grabbing my gear. "I don't know what to call it. Big as a bear, but it moves like a cat. And Luke..." He stopped, rubbing his face with shaky hands. "It drained all the blood. Every last drop. But didn't eat hardly any of the meat." Now, I'd heard stories like this before. Down in North Carolina, they call it the Beast of Bladenboro. Folks claim there's some kind of vampire cat that kills livestock and pets. But every time I looked into those stories, turned out to be just a black bear or maybe a sick mountain lion. Animals do strange things when they're hurt or desperate. But Jim looked so scared, I figured I better check it out. The drive up to Backbone Ridge takes about 40 minutes on the old logging roads. It's rough country, 4,000 feet up, thick hardwood forest, and ravines so deep you can't see the bottom. Perfect place for large predators to hide. Perfect place for someone to get hurt if they're not careful. When we got there, I knew right away this wasn't any normal bear kill. 12 deer. That's how many we found in the first hour of searching. All of them arranged in a rough circle, maybe 50 yards across. Each one had 2 puncture wounds in the neck, clean and precise. The blood was completely gone, but the bodies looked fresh. No bloating, no smell of decay. like they'd been killed an hour ago instead of what had to be several days. "Jim," I said, kneeling next to the nearest carcass. "When did you first see this?" "Yesterday morning. But, Luke, I swear these bodies weren't here when I walked through 3 days ago." I pulled out my measuring tape and started documenting everything. The puncture wounds were exactly 3 inches apart, too wide for any mountain lion I'd ever seen. Too precise for a bear. Bears tear and rip. This looked almost surgical. Then I found the tracks. They were huge, 8 inches across, bigger than any bear print in my files. 4-toed, like a cat, but with claw marks that went deep into the frozen ground. The stride length was what really got my attention. 6 feet between prints when it was walking normally. That meant whatever made these tracks stood at least 6 feet tall at the shoulder. "Jim, you said it moved like a cat?" "Yeah, but..." He pointed to a set of tracks leading away from the kill site. "Look at these." The tracks changed. For about 20 yards, they showed the same 4-legged pattern. Then suddenly, they became 2-legged. Same size, same claw marks, but now they were spaced like something walking upright. Like a man, but with feet the size of dinner plates. I'd never seen anything like it in 14 years of tracking. We followed the trail for about a quarter mile. It led us through thick pine groves and across a frozen creek. The tracks were easy to follow at first. Whatever this thing was, it was heavy enough to leave deep impressions, even in the rocky soil. Then they just stopped. Not at a cliff or a stream or anywhere that made sense. They just ended in the middle of a small clearing, like the creature had vanished into thin air. "Luke," Jim's voice was barely a whisper. "You smell that?" I did. Musky, like a wet dog, but with something else underneath. Something sweet and sickly, like meat that's starting to turn. The scent seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. That's when my radio crackled to life. "Luke, this is Frank. You copy?" Frank Williamson, my partner for the last 6 years. Good man, steady head. "I'm here, Frank. What's your 20? "About 2 miles south of your position, Luke. I got more kills down here." "Same pattern. And Luke..." His voice dropped. "I got witnesses." The witnesses were a family from Richmond. Dad, Mom, 2 teenage kids on a camping trip. They'd set up their tent near a small lake about 3 miles from where Jim found the first kills. Around midnight, something had walked through their camp. It was huge, the father told us, his wife and kids huddled in their car, walking on 2 legs like a man, but covered in black foam. Its eyes..." He shuddered. "Its eyes glowed red in our flashlight beam." "How tall?" I asked. 8 feet, maybe more. It didn't try to hurt us, just walked right through our camp like we weren't even there. But the sounds it made..." The man's wife started crying. "Like a woman screaming, but not human. Not human at all." We convinced them to pack up and head back to town. Whatever was out here, it was big enough and strange enough that I didn't want civilians around. Frank pulled me aside. "Luke, I brought someone with me. Dr. Susan Hayes from the Game Commission. She's a biologist, specializes in predator behavior." Dr. Hayes was a small woman, maybe 40, with intense green eyes and graying hair pulled back in a ponytail. She'd already started examining the kills Frank had found. "Ranger Ashford," she said, shaking my hand. "I've never seen anything like this. The blood drainage is complete, not a drop left in any of these animals. But there's no pooling, no spatter pattern. It's like something drank it all, while the heart was still pumping. What kind of predator does that?" She looked at me for a long moment. "Honestly, none that I know of. At least, none that exist in North America." We set up a base camp that night about a mile from the kill sites. 3 tents, portable radio, and enough gear to stay out for a week if we needed to. Dr. Hayes had brought some fancy equipment, night vision scopes, motion sensors, even a few trail cameras that could see in complete darkness. "If this thing is real," she said, "we'll get pictures." But the cameras never worked right. Every time we checked them, the film was ruined, just static and white streaks like something had interfered with the electronics. The motion sensors went off constantly, but when we investigated, there was never anything there. The second night, we heard it calling. I was on watch around midnight when the sound started. Low at first, like wind through the trees. Then it got louder, clearer. It was definitely a voice, female, human-sounding, but with an edge that made my skin crawl. "Help me!" it called from somewhere in the darkness. "Please, someone help me!" Frank was out of his tent in seconds, rifle in hand. "That's coming from the North Ridge." "Could be a lost hiker," Dr. Hayes said, but her voice was shaky. I knew better. No lost hiker sounded like that. The voice was too clear, carried too far. And there was something wrong with the tone, like someone trying to imitate human speech without really understanding how it worked. "We stick together," I said. "Nobody goes alone." The calling continued for about an hour, moving around our camp in a wide circle. Sometimes it sounded close enough to touch. Other times it seemed to come from miles away. But it never got closer, and we never saw anything. On the third day, we found more kills. Not just deer this time. A black bear, drained just like the others. The bear weighed at least 400 pounds, but something had killed it and moved the body almost a quarter mile from where the attack happened. "Look at this," Dr. Hayes called out. She was examining trees around the kill site. Deep claw marks scored the bark, starting about 10 feet off the ground and going up another 5 feet. Whatever did this is huge, and it climbs. That night, Frank volunteered to take the late watch. I should have said no, should have insisted we all stay together. But Frank was experienced, and we needed someone awake while the rest of us slept. I woke up around 3 in the morning to silence. Not normal forest silence. There are always sounds in the woods at night. Owls, small animals moving through the underbrush, wind in the trees. This was different. Complete, absolute quiet, like every living thing was holding its breath. Frank's radio was sitting on the log next to our fire pit, hissing with static. "Frank?" I called softly. No answer. I found his rifle leaning against a tree about 50 yards from camp. Saint, ill-loaded, safety off. Frank would never leave his weapon like that, not out here. The trail was easy to follow at first. Boot prints in the soft earth, broken branches where he'd pushed through thick brush. Then the trail changed. Frank's footprints continued, but next to them were those massive claw marks, like something had been walking beside him. The trail led to a small clearing about a quarter mile from camp. That's where I found Frank. He was hanging upside down from a thick oak branch about 8 feet off the ground. No blood on the ground beneath him. No blood anywhere. His face was white as paper, eyes wide open, staring at nothing. 2 puncture wounds in his neck, just like the deer. Dr. Hayes took it hard. She and Frank had worked together before, and she blamed herself for bringing the equipment that didn't work, for not warning us about what we might be dealing with. "This isn't a normal predator," she said, staring at Frank's body. "I've been thinking about the blood drainage, the claw marks, the behavior patterns. There are stories, legends from this region." "What kind of stories?" She pulled out a thick book from her pack. "Cherokee folklore. They have stories about something called the Wampus Cat. Half woman, half mountain lion. According to the legends, it was once a Cherokee woman who used dark magic to transform herself so she could hunt with the men. But the magic corrupted her, turned her into something that craves blood." "You're talking about a monster from fairy tales." "Am I?" She pointed to the claw marks on the tree above where we'd found Frank. "Look at the spacing. Look at the depth. Whatever did this has to be at least 8 feet tall and strong enough to lift a 200-pound man into a tree." That night, it came for us. We'd moved our camp after finding Frank, but it didn't matter. The thing knew where we were. It started just after midnight. First, the electronics went crazy. Radio filled with static, flashlights dimming and flickering. Then came the sound of something large moving through the trees around our camp. "There," Dr. Hayes whispered, pointing into the darkness beyond our fire. 2 red lights gleamed in the forest about 8 feet off the ground, eyes reflecting our firelight. But no animal's eyes glowed that bright, that steady. The eyes moved closer, and I could make out a shape behind them. Black fur, massive shoulders, but walking upright like a man. It stepped into the edge of our firelight, and I got my first clear look at the thing that had killed Frank. It was huge, 8 feet tall at least, with the body of a giant cat but walking on its hind legs. Its front paws were almost like hands, with claws as long as kitchen knives. The face was the worst part, almost human, but stretched and distorted, with fangs that were too long and eyes that burned like coals. Dr. Hayes was right. This wasn't any natural predator. Cherokee legends, she whispered, not taking her eyes off the creature. The Wampus cat. It's real. I raised my rifle, aimed for center mass, and fired. The bullet hit the creature square in the chest. It looked down at the wound, almost curious, then looked back at us. The hole closed up like it had never been there. Silver, Dr. Hayes said. The legends say only silver can hurt it. The creature let out that horrible wailing sound we'd heard before. Half woman, half wildcat. Then it charged. I've never seen anything move that fast. 1 second it was 20 yards away. The next it was on top of Dr. Hayes. She screamed once, then went silent. The creature lifted her off the ground with one massive paw, and I watched the life drain out of her eyes as it fed. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran. Behind me, I could hear the creature crashing through the forest, following my trail. It was faster than me, stronger than me, and bullets couldn't stop it. But I had one advantage. I knew these woods better than anything else in the world. I led it on a chase through the darkest, most tangled parts of the forest, across frozen streams, through thorn thickets that tore at my clothes, over rock slides that would break a normal animal's legs. But this thing wasn't normal. It kept coming. Finally, I reached the place I'd been heading for. The old Cherokee village site, abandoned years ago, but still marked with a historical plaque. If Dr. Hayes was right about the legends, this might be the only place I could find help. Mary Sequoia lived in a small cabin about a mile from the village site. She was old. Nobody knew exactly how old, and most folks thought she was crazy. But she was Cherokee, and she knew the old stories. I pounded on her door at 4 a.m, bloody and torn up from running through the forest. "The Wampus cat," I gasped when she opened the door. "It's real. It killed my friends." She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded like she'd been expecting this. "Come in," she said. "We don't have much time." Mary had a collection of old silver dollars that had belonged to her grandfather. She melted them down in a small furnace behind her cabin, casting the silver into rough bullets that would fit my rifle. "Silver alone isn't enough," she said, holding the bullets over a small fire while she chanted in Cherokee. "It must be blessed, made sacred. Only then will it harm the Wampus cat." The blessing took almost an hour. By the time we finished, the sun was starting to rise. Mary pressed the bullets into my hand. "4 bullets," she said. "That's all the silver I have. Don't miss." I made it back to Backbone Ridge just as the creature was finishing with our campsite. It had torn through our tents and equipment like they were made of paper. When it saw me, it let out that terrible wailing cry and started moving in my direction. This time, I stood my ground. The first silver bullet hit it in the shoulder. A creature screamed, not the wailing cry from before, but a sound of real pain. Black blood sprayed from the wound, and the thing stumbled backward. The second bullet caught it in the chest. More screaming, more black blood. But it kept coming. The third bullet hit it in the face just below the left eye. The creature fell to its knees, clawing at the wound. The silver was burning it from the inside out. I had 1 bullet left. I took careful aim and put it right between those glowing red eyes. The Wampus cat fell backward off the cliff face, crashing down into the ravine below. I could hear it hitting rocks and trees on the way down. Then silence. I found the creature at the bottom of the ravine, still alive but barely. The silver bullets had done real damage. Its face was a burned ruin, and black blood pooled around its body. But it was healing. Slowly, but I could see the wound starting to close. Following a blood trail, I tracked it to a cave system I'd never seen before, hidden behind a waterfall about a half-mile from the cliff. The cave went deep into the mountain, and the smell that came out of it was like nothing I'd ever experienced. Death and decay and something else. Something old and evil. I didn't go in far, but I went in far enough. The cave was full of bones. Human bones, animal bones. Some so old they crumbled when I touched them. I found artifacts too. Cherokee pottery, colonial-era buttons, a Civil War sword. This thing had been killing in these mountains for hundreds of years. The creature was at the very back of the cave, curled up like it was sleeping. The silver wounds were healing, but slowly. In a few days, maybe a week, it would be back to full strength. I had some dynamite in my pack, standard gear for clearing fallen trees from trails. I used all of it to seal the cave entrance. Brought down enough rock to bury the thing for good, or at least for a very long time. The official report blamed Frank and Dr. Hayes' deaths on a rogue black bear. The area around Backbone Ridge was closed to hunting indefinitely. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital getting rabies shots and talking to a psychiatrist who thought I was having some kind of breakdown. Maybe I was. Maybe I still am. But I keep blessed silver bullets in my rifle now, and I've taught the other rangers about the old Cherokee stories. Most of them think I'm crazy, but a few listen. The smart ones carry silver too. It's been 3 years since that November, and there haven't been any more killings like the ones on Backbone Ridge, but sometimes, late at night when I'm out on patrol, I hear that wailing cry in the distance. And sometimes I find tracks, big, four-toed tracks that change to two-legged partway through. The cave is still sealed. I check on it every few months, but rock can be moved, and sealed things don't always stay sealed forever. If you ever find yourself hunting in the Appalachian Mountains, carry silver. And if you hear a woman's voice calling for help in the darkness, don't go looking for her. Some things are better left alone in the dark. My name is William Shepard, but folks just call me Bill. I've been a ranger in Daniel Boone National Forest for 18 years now, and I've seen pretty much everything these Kentucky woods can throw at you. Bears, wild boar, lost hikers, illegal hunters, you name it. But what happened at Massacre Hollow in September of '63 changed everything I thought I knew about this job. I'm 44 years old, born and raised right here in Kentucky. My great-grandfather fought with the Union Army during the Civil War, and my family's been telling those old battle stories for as long as I can remember. That's probably why I ended up specializing in historical sites protection. Over the years, I've documented 34 historical sites across the forest, most of them Civil War related. I know these battlefields like the back of my hand. Now, I've always been a practical man. When tourists would ask me about ghost stories at the old battle sites, I'd just shake my head and smile. Civil War ghosts are just old wives' tales, I'd tell them. Good for selling postcards, but that's about it. I figured people just got spooked being in places where men died. Nothing more to it than that. The trouble started when I got a call from a Civil War reenactment group. They'd been planning to hold their annual event at Massacre Hollow, same as they had for the past 5 years. But this time, something was different. The group leader, a man named Tom Bradley, sounded shaken up when he called. "Bill, we had some strange things happen during our practice run last weekend," he said. "I'm not sure how to explain it, but some of our boys got hurt. Real hurt, even though we were only using blanks." Massacre Hollow sits deep in the forest about 10 miles from the nearest road. Back in 1863, it was the site of a nasty ambush. Confederate guerrillas led by a man called Bloody Bill Henderson Trapp had 47 Union soldiers there. It was a massacre, pure and simple. Henderson's men didn't just kill the Union boys, they tortured them first. When Henderson was finally caught and hanged 6 months later, folks say he cursed the place with his dying breath. I drove out to meet Bradley and his group that Tuesday morning. The weather was strange for September. Heavy fog rolling in and out, and the temperature kept dropping for no reason I could figure. When I got to their camp, I could see right away that these men were rattled. "Show me what happened," I said. Bradley led me to the clearing where they'd been practicing. We were running through the ambush scene, just like always. Our Confederate boys were hidden up in those rocks, and the Union soldiers were marching through the hollow. Everything was going normal until about sunset. He pointed to a spot near the center of the clearing. That's where it started. The temperature just dropped like someone opened a freezer door. Then we started hearing things. Sounds of battle that weren't coming from us. I looked around the area. It was just a normal forest clearing, maybe 100 yards across, surrounded by thick woods and rocky outcrops. Perfect spot for an ambush, which is why Henderson had chosen it all those years ago. What kind of sounds? I asked. Gunfire, screaming, men shouting orders. But here's the thing, Bill. It was all in the old style. Commands I'd never heard before, but they sounded real military. And the gunfire wasn't like our blanks. It was different, heavier. Bradley's friend, a man named Pete Morris, stepped forward. He was holding his arm in a sling. "Show him your wound, Pete," Bradley said. Pete rolled up his sleeve. There was a nasty gash on his forearm, already starting to heal but still raw-looking. "Musket ball did that," Pete said quietly. "But that's impossible, because we're only firing blanks. I've been doing this for 12 years, and I know the difference." I examined the wound. It certainly looked like something had torn through his arm, and there was still some metal fragments embedded in the flesh. But that didn't make sense. Blank cartridges don't have projectiles. "Did you see who shot you?" I asked. Pete and Bradley exchanged glances. "That's the thing," Pete said. "I saw the muzzle flash, but when I looked to see who fired, there was nobody there. Just empty woods." I spent the rest of the day looking around the site, taking notes and trying to find some logical explanation. Maybe someone had mixed live rounds in with the blanks by accident. Maybe there were illegal hunters in the area who'd fired by mistake. But I couldn't find any evidence of that. As the sun started to set, I noticed the temperature dropping again. The fog was rolling in thick, and I could barely see 20 feet in any direction. That's when I heard it for the first time, the sound of marching feet coming from deeper in the woods. I called out, thinking maybe there were other reenactors in the area. But there was no answer, just the steady sound of boots on leaves getting closer. That's when I knew something was very wrong at Massacre Hollow. The next morning, I called for backup. Carl Preston had been a ranger almost as long as me, and he knew the historical sites better than anyone. If something strange was happening at Massacre Hollow, I wanted Carl there to help figure it out. Carl brought along a box of historical documents about the 1863 ambush. We spread them out on the tailgate of my truck and went through them carefully. "Look at this," Carl said, pointing to an old military report. "Henderson's guerrillas didn't just kill those Union soldiers. They tortured them for information first, mutilated some of them. It was bad enough that even other Confederate units wouldn't work with Henderson after that." I read through the report. It painted a picture of men who had lost all sense of honor or decency. Henderson's group had become more like wild animals than soldiers. "And here's Henderson's execution record," Carl continued. "Says he cursed the battlefield with his last words, told the hangman that he and his boys would keep fighting the war until Judgment Day." "You don't believe in that stuff, do you?" I asked. Carl shrugged. "I didn't used to, but I've been doing some research since you called. There have been reports of strange things at Massacre Hollow going back decades. People seeing soldiers in the woods, hearing battle sounds, finding old bullets in trees. Most folks just write it off as imagination, but there's an awful lot of reports for it to be nothing." We decided to camp at the site that night to see what happened. As the sun started going down, that familiar chill set in. The fog rolled through the trees like it had a mind of its own, swirling and shifting in patterns that didn't match the wind. "You feel that?" Carl whispered. I nodded. The air felt electric, like right before a lightning storm. My compass was spinning wildly, and the radio was picking up static that almost sounded like voices speaking in some kind of code. That's when we saw the first one. He came walking out of the fog like he owned the place, a Confederate soldier in a gray uniform that looked brand new. But his face was wrong. It was too pale, almost gray, and his eyes had a hollow look to them. He was carrying an old musket, and when he saw us, he raised it and fired. The sound was deafening, much louder than any blank cartridge. I felt something whistle past my ear and heard it smack into a tree behind me. When I looked back, there was a musket ball buried deep in the bark. "Run!" I shouted. We took off through the woods, crashing through brush and stumbling over roots in the dark. Behind us, I could hear more gunfire and the sounds of men shouting. But these weren't the voices of living men. They had a hollow, echoing quality that made my skin crawl. We made it back to our trucks and got out of there as fast as we could. It wasn't until we were back at the ranger station that we felt safe, enough to talk about what we'd seen. "That was no reenactor," Carl said, his hands still shaking as he poured coffee. "That uniform was perfect. Better than anything you'd see in a museum. And did you see his face? That wasn't a living man, Bill." I pulled the musket ball out of the tree bark where it had hit. It was old. Really old. The kind of ball they used in Civil War muskets, not the kind of thing you could buy at a sporting goods store. "We need to call this in," I said. "Call what in? That we saw a ghost? They'll think we've lost our minds." Carl had a point, but I also knew we couldn't let that reenactment group go back to Massacre Hollow, not if there were armed spirits in those woods. The next day I called Tom Bradley and told him the event was canceled. I made up some story about environmental concerns, but I could tell he knew I was holding something back. "It's happening again, isn't it?" he said. "The same thing that happened to us." "Just stay away from the hollow for a while," I told him. "I'll let you know when it's safe." But I was beginning to think it might never be safe again. That evening, Carl and I went back with better equipment, cameras, recording devices, and a surveyor's kit to measure the temperature changes. We stayed well back from the clearing this time, watching from the tree line. As the sun set, the fog rolled in again. The temperature dropped 30 degrees in less than 10 minutes. That's when we heard the marching. They came out of the mist like something from a nightmare. Dozens of Confederate soldiers, all in perfect uniforms, all carrying weapons that should have been in museums. But the worst part was their faces. Every one of them had that same gray, hollow look. These weren't living men. They were something else entirely. Behind them came their leader. Even at a distance, I knew it had to be Bloody Bill Henderson. He was taller than the others, with long black hair and a beard. He carried a cavalry saber that gleamed in the moonlight, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the clearing like thunder. "Form up, boys," he shouted. "The Bluebellies are coming. Today, we finish what we started." As if summoned by his words, Union soldiers began appearing from the other side of the clearing. They looked just as dead as the Confederates, but they moved with the same military precision they must have had in life. What happened next was the most horrible thing I've ever seen. The two groups of ghost soldiers charged at each other with a fury that seemed to shake the very ground. They fought with bayonets and rifle butts, screaming and cursing like wild animals. But this wasn't a quick battle. It went on, with soldiers falling and getting back up to fight again. And through it all, Henderson stood in the center, directing his men and laughing like a madman. Carl was recording everything, but his hands were shaking so bad I wasn't sure we'd get anything useful. "We have to get out of here," he whispered. But I couldn't move. I was watching history repeat itself over and over in an endless loop of violence and death. That's when Henderson looked right at us. "Well, well," Henderson called out, his voice cutting through the sounds of battle. "Looks like we got ourselves some visitors." The fighting stopped immediately. Every ghostly soldier turned to look at us with those hollow, dead eyes. Carl grabbed my arm and started pulling me back toward the trucks. "Don't run," Henderson said, and something in his voice made us freeze. "Running just makes it more fun." He started walking toward us, his saber gleaming in the moonlight. As he got closer, I could see that his uniform was stained with blood, some of it fresh, some of it so old it had turned black. "You boys look like you might be useful," he said. "We're always looking for new recruits. The war ain't over, you know. Won't be over until every last bluebelly is dead and buried." "We're not soldiers," I managed to say. "We're just park rangers." Henderson laughed, and the sound was like nails on a chalkboard. "Every man's a soldier when it comes down to it. Question is, which side are you on?" Behind him, the other ghosts were spreading out, surrounding us. I realized we weren't going to make it back to the trucks. There were too many of them, and they moved faster than any living man should be able to. I fought for the Union, I said, thinking of my great-grandfather's stories. My family's always been Union. Henderson's face twisted with rage. Union scum! Boys, looks like we got ourselves some prisoners to interrogate. The Confederate ghosts started closing in, their weapons raised. That's when Carl did something that probably saved our lives. He pulled out his service revolver and fired 3 shots into the air. The sound of modern gunfire seemed to confuse the spirits. They stopped moving and looked around like they weren't sure what they'd heard. Henderson frowned and tilted his head. That's not a musket, he said slowly. Run! Carl shouted. We took off through the woods again, but this time the ghosts followed us. I could hear them crashing through the brush behind us, shouting orders and battle cries. But they seemed to be having trouble moving through the forest at night, maybe because they were tied to the battlefield somehow. We made it to the trucks and drove straight to town. I called the county sheriff and told him we had a dangerous situation at Massacre Hollow, but I didn't mention ghosts. I just said there were armed men in the woods who had threatened us. Sheriff Davis sent 2 deputies out to investigate the next morning. They came back an hour later looking confused. Didn't find anybody, Deputy Johnson reported, but there's definitely been some kind of disturbance out there. Trees torn up, ground all churned up like there was a fight, and we foe on these. He handed me a plastic bag full of musket balls and pieces of old uniform buttons. Some kind of reenactment gone wrong? Sheriff Davis asked. Something like that, I said. But I knew it was getting worse. The spirits weren't just replaying their old battle anymore. They were trying to drag living people into it. That afternoon, Carl came to my house looking like he hadn't slept in days. I've been doing more research, he said, talking to some of the old-timers in town. This has happened before, Bill. Back in 1923, a hunting party disappeared at Massacre Hollow. They found their bodies 3 days later, all dressed in Civil War uniforms and armed with antique weapons. The coroner said they'd been shot with musket balls. What else? In 1941, a group of Boy Scouts camping near the hollow reported seeing soldiers in the woods. 2 of the boys went missing. When they found them the next morning, they were wearing pieces of Confederate uniforms and speaking in some kind of old-fashioned dialect. They had to be hospitalized for weeks before they went back to normal. Carl pulled out a folder full of newspaper clippings and police reports. It happens every 20 years or so, always in September when the fog is thick. And it's always the same. People see the ghost soldiers and some of them get pulled into the battle somehow. What are you saying? I'm saying Henderson found a way to keep recruiting new soldiers for his army. He's been doing it for 100 years. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Henderson's words. Every man's a soldier when it comes down to it. What if he was right? What if the only way to stop this was to fight back? The next evening, I got a call from Tom Bradley. 3 of his reenactors had decided to go back to Massacre Hollow on their own, despite my warnings. They left this morning, Bradley said. I tried to stop them, but they said they weren't going to be scared off by ghost stories. I called Carl and we drove out to the hollow as fast as we could. We found their truck parked at the trailhead, but there was no sign of the men. As the sun started to set, we heard the familiar sounds of battle coming from the clearing. But this time, there was something different about it. The voices sounded more alive, more human. We crept through the woods to our observation spot and looked out at the clearing. The ghost battle was happening again, but now there were 3 modern men fighting alongside the Confederate spirits. They were wearing pieces of Civil War uniforms over their regular clothes, and they were fighting with the same savage fury as the ghosts. Dear God, Carl whispered. He's converted them. Henderson was standing in the center of it all, directing the battle like a conductor leading an orchestra. When he saw us watching, he smiled and waved his saber in our direction. Come on down, boys, he called out. The war's just getting started. But I could see something else in his expression. Hunger. He wasn't just replaying an old battle anymore. He was building an army, and he wanted us to join it. That's when I realized the horrible truth. Every 20 years, when the conditions were right, Henderson's spirits became strong enough to cross over into our world. And every time they did, they took some of the living back with them. We had to stop them, but I was beginning to think it might already be too late. The next morning, I drove to the county seat to research property records and old newspaper archives. What I found made my blood run cold. Massacre Hollow had been the site of more than just one Civil War battle. According to the records, Henderson and his men had been practicing some kind of dark ritual before the ambush. They'd murdered several prisoners in a specific pattern, arranging their bodies in a circle around what they called a spirit anchor. An 1863 Army report described finding the remains. The enemy had arranged the deceased, in a manner suggesting occult practices. Investigation revealed evidence of ritual murder and desecration of remains. Site was not properly consecrated due to urgent tactical requirements. That was the key. The Union Army had never properly buried the dead or consecrated the battlefield. Henderson's men had bound their souls to the site through blood ritual, and they'd been trapped there ever since. I called the local Methodist minister, Reverend Josiah Mills, and asked him to meet me at the ranger station. Mills was an older man, maybe 65, with kind eyes and steady hands. If anyone could help us put these spirits to rest, it would be him. "I've heard the stories about Massacre Hollow," Mills said when I explained the situation. "My grandfather was a preacher here during the 1920s. He always said that place needed proper consecration, but the church elders were afraid to get involved." "Will you help us?" Mills nodded. "Those poor souls have been suffering for 100 years. It's time to give them peace." We drove out to the hollow that afternoon with Carl and Mills. The Reverend brought his Bible, holy water, and everything he needed for a consecration ceremony. The plan was simple. We'd perform the ritual during daylight, when the spirits were weakest, and hopefully break whatever was holding them to the battlefield. But when we got to the clearing, we found we weren't alone. The 3 missing reenactors were there, but they weren't themselves anymore. They were wearing full Confederate uniforms and standing at attention in the center of the clearing. Their eyes had that same hollow look as the ghosts. "Welcome, brothers," one of them said in an accent that definitely wasn't his own. "Colonel Henderson is expecting you." "Those aren't the same men who went missing," Carl whispered. "Look at their faces." He was right. The reenactors' features had chans, jed somehow. They looked older, harder, like they'd been through years of war instead of just one night in the woods. Mills stepped forward with his Bible. "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to release these men and depart from this place." The possessed reenactors laughed. "Your God has no power here, preacher. This ground belongs to Colonel Henderson now." That's when the temperature started dropping. The fog rolled in thick and fast, and we could hear the sounds of marching feet coming from all directions. Henderson's ghost army emerged from the mist, dozens of Confederate spirits with their weapons ready. But Henderson himself looked different than before. He seemed more solid, more real. The ritual was working, but not the way we'd hoped. It was making him stronger. "You should have stayed away," Henderson said, his voice booming across the clearing. "But since you're here, you might as well join my boys. We can always use more soldiers." Mills raised his Bible and started reading from Psalms, but Henderson just smiled. "I made a deal with powers older than your God, preacher. Blood for blood, soul for soul. Every man who dies on this battlefield belongs to me." Henderson raised his saber and pointed it at Mills. "Kill the preacher first. Then we'll recruit the others." The possessed reenactors and ghost soldiers started advancing on us. Mills kept reading from his Bible, but I could see it wasn't working. These spirits were bound by something darker than ordinary death. That's when Carl did something that shocked us all. He pulled out his service weapon and shot one of the possessed reenactors. The man dropped immediately, but instead of bleeding, he just dissolved into mist. A few seconds later, he reformed as a full Confederate ghost, standing alongside Henderson's other spirits. "Carl, what have you done?" I shouted. "I've figured it out," Carl said grimly. "Anyone who dies here becomes one of them. That's how Henderson keeps building his army." Henderson was laughing now. "Smart man. Yes, every death on this battlefield feeds my weir. and I've got plenty of deaths planned for tonight." The ghost soldiers were almost on us when Mills suddenly stopped reading and looked up with a strange expression. "Wait," he said. "The ritual." Henderson's ritual was about binding souls to the battlefield. But what if we could reverse it? "What are you talking about?" I asked. "The bodies were arranged in a specific pattern, right? A circle around a central point. If we could find that central point and perform a counter-ritual..." Henderson heard this, and his expression changed from amusement to rage. "You don't know what you're messing with, old man. Some things are meant to stay dead." But Mills was already moving, looking around the clearing with new purpose. "There." He pointed to a spot near the center of the clearing where the ground looked different, darker, more disturbed. "That's where they performed the original ritual." Henderson roared with fury and charged at Mills with his saber raised. But the old preacher was braver than he looked. He stood his ground and began reciting what sounded like Latin. The effect was immediate. Henderson's charge slowed, and the other ghosts began writhing like they were in pain. The fog started swirling faster, and the temperature dropped even more. "Keep going," I shouted to Mills. But Henderson wasn't finished. With a tremendous effort, he broke through whatever was holding him back and drove his spectral saber through Mills' chest. The old preacher gasped and fell to his knees, but he kept reciting the counter-ritual even as his life ebbed away. And then something terrible happened. As Mills died, his body began to change. His clothes shifted into a Confederate uniform, and when he stood up, his eyes had that same hollow look as the other ghosts. "Welcome to the regiment, preacher," Henderson said with satisfaction. But Mills, or what had been Mills, smiled gray, like, "I'm not done yet, Colonel." And he continued the Latin recitation, but now with the power of the spirits themselves behind it. The effect was devastating. One by one, Henderson's ghost, soldiers began dissolving, their souls finally free to move on. The possessed reenactors collapsed as the spirits left their bodies. Henderson himself was fighting it. But even he couldn't resist the power of the counter-ritual being spoken by one of his own soldiers. "This isn't over," he screamed as his form began to fade. "I'll be back. The war will never end." But his voice was getting weaker, and within minutes, the clearing was empty except for the unconscious reenactors. Mills' ghost looked at us one last time, and for a moment, his eyes were kind again. "It's finished," he said. Then he too dissolved into mist and was gone. The sun was rising, and Massacre Hollow was quiet for the first time in 100 years. The three reenactors woke up with no memory of the past few days. They thought they'd just gotten lost in the woods and passed out from exhaustion. We drove them to the hospital for observation, but they were physically fine. Officially, the deaths were blamed on a reenactment accident with live ammunition. 4 people died that week. The original 3 reenactors who'd been converted, plus Reverend Mills. But according to the records, Mills died of a heart attack at home. Only Carl and I knew the truth about what really happened in those woods. I had Massacre Hollow closed to the public permanently. The historical markers were removed, and the trails were officially decommissioned due to environmental concerns. It's been 2 years now, and there haven't been any more reports of supernatural activity. But I still patrol the area regularly, especially in September when the fog gets thick. Because Henderson's last words keep echoing in my mind. "I'll be back. The war will never end." Carl retired 6 months after the incident. He said he couldn't sleep at night, kept dreaming about ghost soldiers and battlefield screams. I don't blame him. What we sometimes all out there changed us both. I've been documenting everything that happened, keeping detailed records for whoever takes over this job after me, because I have a feeling this isn't really over. Henderson had 100 years to perfect his spiritual bindings, and men like that don't give up easy. I've also been researching other Civil War battlefields in the area. There are stories, whispered rumors about places where the dead don't rest easy. Shiloh, Antietam, Gettysburg, they all have their ghost stories. But how many of those stories are real? Last month, I got a call from a ranger in Tennessee. He'd heard about the incident at Massacre Hollow and wanted to compare notes. Seems they've been having similar problems at a battlefield near Nashville. Disappearances, strange sightings, people finding old musket balls in trees. The thing is, he told me, Our battlefield was consecrated properly after the war. But lately, it's like something's been stirring them up again. Like they're being called to fight by something stronger than whatever was keeping them at rest. That conversation kept me awake for 3 straight nights. Because I started wondering, what if Henderson wasn't working alone? What if there were other Confederate officers out there, other men who'd made deals with dark powers to keep fighting their war? What if Massacre Hollow was just the beginning? I've put in for early retirement. After 18 years in these woods, I've seen enough. But before I go, I'm writing all of this down. Every detail, every conversation, every moment of terror. Because whoever comes after me needs to know what they're up against. And if you're reading this, if you're the one who found my files, then listen carefully. Stay away from Civil War battlefields when the fog rolls in. If you hear the sounds of marching feet or distant gunfire, don't investigate. Get as far away as you can and don't look back. Because the war isn't over. It may never be over. And somewhere out there in the mist, Bloody Bill Henderson is still recruiting soldiers for his army of the dead. Final note found attached to Ranger Shepard's files. William Shepard retired from the Forest Service in December 1963. He was found dead in his home 3 months later, apparently from natural causes. His body was discovered wearing pieces of a Civil War Confederate uniform. The coroner ruled it an eccentric final request, but investigating officers noted that Shepard had no known interest in Confederate memorabilia and had always identified as a Union descendant. The uniform pieces were authentic 1860s artifacts and showed signs of recent battle damage. Massacre Hollow remains closed to the public. My name is Marcus Redwine, but everyone calls me Mark. I've been a ranger in George Washington National Forest for 12 years now. Before that, I spent my childhood on the Cherokee Reservation with my grandmother after my parents died in a car crash. She raised me on old stories and older wisdom. I thought I knew everything about surviving in these mountains. I was wrong. It was December 1976 when everything changed. The winter had come early and mean that year, dropping temperatures so low that even the old-timers were talking. I just finished my 23rd successful winter rescue, pulled a lost hunter out of a ravine before he froze to death. The newspapers called me a hero. My grandmother just shook her head and said the mountains were getting angry. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. 5 people missing. A family from Richmond who'd gone camping up on Shenandoah Mountain. The Walsh family, David and Linda, parents in their 30s, and their 3 kids aged 6, 9, and 12. Their campsite was at 3,500 feet, right in the teeth of the worst blizzard we'd seen in 20 years. "Mark, you need to get up there," Sheriff Collins told me over the radio. "Temperature's dropping to 15 below. If they're still alive, they won't be for long." I loaded my gear and headed out in my truck, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the snow. The radio crackled with weather updates. Winds up to 60 miles per hour, visibility near zero. This was the kind of storm that killed people, and I'd seen enough frozen bodies to know what we were probably going to find. The road ended 2 miles from their last known location. I strapped on my snowshoes and started hiking through snow that came up to my knees. The wind cut through my winter gear like it was made of paper. Every step was a fight. But something felt wrong from the start. The folk. Rest was too quiet. Even in a blizzard, you usually hear something. Wind in the trees, branches breaking under snow weight. This silence felt thick, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. I'd grown up hearing my grandmother's stories about things that lived in the deep woods, creatures that weren't quite animal, weren't quite human. The Cherokee had names for them, warnings passed down through generations. But I'd always figured those were just stories to keep kids from wandering off alone. That day, I started to wonder if maybe grandmother knew something I didn't. The snow kept falling, and with each step deeper into the forest, that wrongness grew stronger. My compass started acting funny, needle spinning like it couldn't find north. My radio filled with static. And somewhere in the distance, I thought I heard something that might have been singing or screaming. I found their campsite just as the sun was setting, though you couldn't really tell with all the snow and clouds. What I saw there made my blood run cold, and it wasn't because of the temperature. The tent was shredded, not torn by wind or crushed by snow, slashed. Long, clean cuts that went from top to bottom, like someone had taken a knife to it. But the cuts were too high up, too far apart. Whatever made them had reach longer than any human. The sleeping bags were scattered around, ripped open and empty. No bodies, but plenty of blood soaked into the snow. Fresh blood that should have frozen solid in this cold, but it was still dark red and liquid. That's when I noticed the heat. Despite the blizzard raging around me, the area right around the campsite felt warm. Not just less cold, actually warm. The snow had melted in a perfect circle about 20 feet across. Steam rose from the wet ground like it was spring instead of the middle of winter. I pulled out my thermometer. The air temperature was -15, just like the weather service said, but when I stuck it in the ground where the tent used to be, it read 90 degrees. That's impossible. Ground can't be that hot. Without a fire, and there was no fire. No ashes, no burned wood, nothing that could explain the heat. Just wet earth steaming in sub-zero air. I called for backup on my radio, but all I got was static and what sounded like whispers in a language I didn't recognize. My compass spun like a broken toy. Every piece of equipment I carried started acting up the moment I stepped into that warm circle. Then I found the tracks. Human footprints, but wrong in every way that mattered. Bare feet in snow that should have meant instant frostbite. Stride length of 8 feet, impossible for a normal person. And each footprint was hot. Actually hot. When I held my hand over one, I could feel warmth radiating up from it. The tracks led away from the campsite, deeper into the forest. I followed them, even though every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around and get out. But somewhere in this nightmare, 5 people might still be alive. I had to try. The footprints were easy to follow because they melted the snow as they went. It was like following a trail of warm water through a frozen wasteland. But the farther I went, the more wrong everything felt. Trees stood at impossible angles. Shadows moved without anything to cast them. And always, that feeling of being watched. I'd gone maybe half a mile when I heard the children crying. It came from off to my left where the tracks split. The larger set continued deeper into the woods, but smaller prints, normal human prints, led toward the sound. I pushed through a thicket of ice-covered branches and found them. All 3 kids, huddled together under a fallen tree. They should have been dead. Should have frozen solid hours ago. Instead, they were alive and warm, their cheeks flushed like they'd been sitting by a fire. "Are you hurt?" I asked, dropping to my knees beside them. The oldest one, a girl, looked at me with eye. It was too old for her 12-year-old face. "The burning man kept us warm," she said. "He said he'd come back for us." I checked their temperature with my hand. They were running fever, high fever. Their skin was hot to the touch, but they weren't sweating. They weren't showing any signs of infection or illness. They were just burning up from the inside. "Where are your parents?" I asked. The little boy, maybe 6 years old, pointed toward the deeper tracks. "Daddy went with the burning man. Mommy tried to stop them, but..." He started crying again. I got on my radio to call for medical evacuation, but the static was worse now. Through the white noise, I could swear I heard laughter. Low, hungry laughter that made my skin crawl. That's when my partner, Jenny McCall, finally reached us, leading a search and rescue team. She took one look at the scene and went pale. "Mark, what the hell happened here?" I didn't have an answer, not one that made sense anyway. But as we prepared to evacuate the children, I made a decision that probably saved all our lives. I called my grandmother. "Grandmother, I need to know about the Wendigo." The silence on the other end of the satellite phone stretched so long I thought the connection had died. When she finally spoke, her voice was heavy with fear. "Where are you, grandson?" "Shenandoah Mountain. We found 3 children, but their parents are missing. There are tracks, but they're not human. And there's heat where there shouldn't be any heat. Get those children away from there, now. And whatever you do, don't let the burning touch you." She told me things I'd never heard before, stories that had been kept from children for good reason. The Wendigo wasn't just a monster from old tales. It was real, and it was hungry. When people eat human flesh to survive, sometimes they don't stop being hungry, she explained. The hunger changes them, makes them into something else. They steal heat from the living to feed the fire inside them. The more they consume, the stronger they become. How do we stop it? You don't fight a Wendigo, Mark. You run. But I couldn't run. Not with David and Linda Walsh still out there somewhere. Jenny and her team took the children back toward the road while I followed the larger tracks deeper into the forest. The storm was getting worse, but inside the trail of melted footprints, the air stayed warm. It was like walking through a tunnel of summer in the middle of winter hell. I found David Walsh 3 miles from the campsite. At first I thought he was dead. He lay sprawled in the snow, completely naked despite the cold. But as I got closer, I could see steam rising from his skin. His body temperature had to be over 100 degrees. David? David, can you hear me? His eyes opened, and I nearly fell backward. They were yellow, like an animal's eyes, and they held a hunger that made my stomach turn. He sat up with movements that were too fluid, too fast. When he smiled, I saw that his teeth had grown into fangs. So warm, he whispered, and his voice echoed strangely, like it was coming from somewhere much larger than his throat. You're so beautifully warm. He'd grown, not just taller, but stretched out, like someone had pulled him on a rack. His arms hung down past his knees, and his fingers ended in claws that looked sharp enough to cut steel. Where's Linda? I managed to ask. His smile widened. She helped me understand, helped me change. Now, I'm never cold again. I found what was left of Linda Walsh 20 feet away. The sight of her body will haunt me until the day I die. She'd been consumed, but not the way an animal would kill prey. This was something else, something that had drained every bit of warmth from her body until she was frozen solid from the inside out. David was on his feet now, moving toward me with that impossible grace. Join us, he said. Feel what it's like to never be cold again. I ran. Behind me, I heard something that get have been laughter, or might have been the sound of hunger itself. My snowshoes slipped and slid as I crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at my face. But no matter how fast I moved, I could feel him getting closer. Then I heard Jenny scream. The sound cut through the storm like a knife. I changed direction, heading toward where I'd left the rescue team. What I found there nearly stopped my heart. The real Wendigo had arrived. It stood 12 feet tall, gaunt as a scarecrow, but radiating heat like a furnace. Its skin looked burned and blackened, but steam poured off it in waves. Its eyes were holes filled with fire, and when it opened its mouth, I saw rows of teeth like broken glass. Jenny was in its grip, her winter gear smoking where it touched her. Ice was forming on her hair and eyebrows even as she struggled. The thing was draining her body heat, pulling the warmth right out of her. The other rescue team members lay scattered in the snow around it. Some weren't moving. Others were making small hurt sounds that barely carried over the wind. And David Walsh stood beside the creature like they were old friends. Beautiful, isn't it? He called to me. Pure hunger given form. It showed me what I could become. The Wendigo turned its burning gaze on me, and I felt my body temperature start to drop just from its attention. This thing didn't just kill people. It fed on the very warmth that kept them alive. I had maybe seconds before it would drain me dry like it was doing to Jenny. My hand went to the emergency flares on my belt, and I remembered something my grandmother had told me years ago about creatures that lived in the cold. Fire feeds on fire, she'd said, but sometimes the biggest flame can starve the smaller ones. I pulled the pin on 3 flares at once and threw them at the Wendigo's feet. The reaction was instant and violent. The creature shrieked, a sound like metal tearing, and dropped Jenny. It stumbled backward, away from the blazing flares, and for the first time looked uncertain. David Walsh wasn't so smart. He lunged at me, probably thinking he could take me down before I could light another flare. He was wrong. The emergency flare went off right in his face. He screamed and fell backward, his superheated body hitting the snow with a hiss like a hot poker in water. But I could see more shapes moving in the darkness beyond the flare light. The Wendigo wasn't alone. It had been busy creating others, spreading its hunger through the mountain like a disease. And they were all coming for us. The circle of flare light was all that stood between us and the hungry dark. I could see them out there, shapes that had once been human, moving with that same terrible grace as David Walsh. The Wendigo had been busy this winter, turning lost campers and hunters into things like itself. Jenny was barely conscious, ice crystals forming on her lips despite being right next to the flares. The creature had drained so much heat from her that her body was shutting down. I pulled her closer to the fire, but I could see it wasn't enough. "The children," she whispered through chattering teeth. "Did we get the children out?" Before I could answer, David Walsh rose from where my flare had knocked him down. Half his face was burned away, but he was still moving, still hungry. "You can't stop it," he said, his voice a wet whisper. "The hunger is everything now. It's all any of us need." He was right about one thing. I couldn't stop it. Not all of them. But maybe I could buy time for Jenny and the others to get away. I lit 2 more flares and held one in each hand like torches. The Wendigo and its pack of transformed humans circled us just outside the light, testing the edges of the heat. That's when I heard my grandmother's voice, carried on the wind, despite being hundreds of miles away. She was singing one of the old songs, the ones in Cherokee that she'd never translated for me. But somehow, I understood every word. It was a song about fire, about the balance between heat and cold, hunger and satisfaction, about the price of consuming what shouldn't be consumed. The Wendigo heard it too, its burning eyes focused on me with something that might have been fear. "You know the old words," it said, and its voice was like wind through winter trees. "But they won't save you. Nothing can stop the hunger." "Maybe not," I said, backing toward where Jenny and the surviving rescue team members lay, "but I can make it work for what I need." I pulled the pins on my last 4 flares and threw them in different directions, creating a wider circle of heat and light. The transformed humans hissed and fell back, but the Wendigo stood its ground. "Fire against fire," I said, remembering grandmother's words. "Let's see which burns hotter." I grabbed an emergency heat pack from my gear and cracked it open. The chemical reaction made it hot enough to cook food on. Then I did something crazy. I threw it right at the Wendigo's chest. The creature caught it instinctively, and for a moment, its expression was almost puzzled. Then the heat pack exploded against its superheated skin. The Wendigo screamed, not the metal-tearing shriek from before, but something almost human, almost in pain. The heat pack had created a feedback loop. Its own burning body heat had caused the chemicals to react violently. But it wasn't enough to kill the thing, just hurt it. That's when David Walsh made his choice, even stretched and changed and made into something monstrous. Enough of the father remained in him to see his children's rescuers in danger. He looked at me, and for just a moment, his yellow eyes were human again. "My kids," he said. "Are they safe?" "Yes," I told him. He nodded once. Then he threw himself at the Wendigo. The collision sent both creatures tumbling into the snow outside our circle of flares. David wrapped his burning arms around the bigger monster and held on, even as it clawed at him with those terrible hands. "Not my children," he screamed. "You can't have my children." The 2 burning bodies rolled through the snow, melting it into steam and mud. They were both creatures of heat now, both feeding on the same source. And when 2 fires tried to consume the same fuel, the explosion lit up the entire mountainside. The blast knocked me flat and sent Jenny rolling away from the flares. Snow and debris rained down around us. When my vision cleared, there was nothing left where David Walsh and the Wendigo had been fighting except a crater of melted earth. The other transformed humans let out wails of loss and hunger, then scattered into the darkness. Without their master, they were just lost, burning things looking for warmth to steal. But our problems weren't over. The explosion had put out most of our flares, and the temperature was dropping fast. Jenny needed medical attention that I couldn't provide in a blizzard. The surviving rescue team members were in shock, and we were still miles from help. I gathered everyone who could move and started the long trek back toward the road. We shared body heat, took turns carrying those who couldn't walk, and burned everything we could find to stay warm. Just before dawn, we heard the helicopter. The doctors at the hospital couldn't explain why the Walsh children had such high fevers with no sign of infection. Their body temperatures slowly returned to normal over the course of a week, but they never talked about what happened up on the mountain. Not to the doctors, not to the social workers, not to anyone except me. "Will the Burning Man come back?" the youngest boy asked me during one of my visits. "No," I told him. "Your daddy made sure of that." Jenny recovered, though she lost 2 fingers to frostbite. She transferred to a desk job after that and never went into the deep woods again. Can't say I blame her. The official report listed the Walsh parents as victims of exposure and hypothermia. The unusual circumstances were attributed to the extreme weather conditions and the stress of the rescue operation. Nobody wanted to dig deeper into what really happened up there. But I knew better, and so did my grandmother. "The hunger that walks upright," she said when I visited her on the reservation. "It's older than the mountains, grandson, older than the Cherokee, older than any people. It feeds on what makes us human, our warmth, our community, our love for each other." She taught me the old protections then, the words and rituals that had kept our people safe for generations, how to recognize the signs of a Wendigo's presence, how to ward against the cold hunger that could turn a person into something else. I carry emergency heat packs now whenever I go into the mountains in winter. Not just the standard gear, specialized chemical heaters that can burn hot enough to hurt something that shouldn't exist. My equipment bag has sage and cedar, blessed according to the old ways. And I never go alone. The area around Shenandoah Mountain has seen more winter deaths in the years since 1976. Unexplained cases of hypothermia, even when the weather wasn't that bad. Campers found frozen solid with expressions of terror on their faces. Hunters who went missing and turned up weeks later changed. I know what's out there now, and I know it's still hungry. But I also know that sometimes love is stronger than hunger. David Walsh proved that when he chose to save his children instead of feeding his new nature. That's something the Wendigo will never understand. It's the one thing that can still burn brighter than its endless cold fire. So if you're ever camping in the mountains during winter, remember this. Carry extra heat, stay together, and never trust the warm spots in the snow. Because sometimes, the most dangerous warmth comes from something that should be cold. And if you hear singing in the wind or see footprints that steam in the snow, don't follow them. Just run. The hunger that walks upright is always looking for its next meal. My name is Patricia Moonbeam, and I need to tell you what really happened in Pisgah National Forest in May of 1985. I've been a park ranger for 9 years now, and I've seen things that would make most people pack up and move to the city. But what I'm about to tell you is different. It's the kind of story that makes you check your locks twice before bed. People call me Patty, and they trust me because I know these mountains. My Cherokee mother taught me to read the sky like a book, and my meteorology degree from NC State taught me the science behind it all. I've predicted 15 major weather events in my time here, saving dozens of lives. The local paper even wrote about my research on mountain weather patterns. I'm telling you this so you'll believe what comes next, because I know how crazy it sounds. I never believed in the old Cherokee stories about the moon-eyed people. My grandmother used to tell tales about pale-skinned folks who lived in caves before the Cherokee came to these mountains. Ancient people with huge eyes who couldn't stand sunlight. Just stories, I thought. Ways to explain things our ancestors couldn't understand. Then the fog came. It started the second week of May. I was doing my morning rounds near Rough Ridge when I noticed the mist rolling in from the valley. Nothing unusual about that. These mountains make their own weather. But this fog was different. It hung in patches, thick as cotton, in places where fog had no business being. The Weather Service said clear skies, but I was staring at walls of white mist that you couldn't see 5 feet through. The fog lasted 3 weeks. 3 weeks of visibility so bad that hikers got lost 50 yards from the main trail. That's when the calls started coming in. First call was from a group of college kids from Charlotte. They'd been camping near the limestone caves up on Rough Ridge, those deep ones that go way back into the mountain. The kids were shaken up, talking about albino people, watching them from the tree line. Said these pale figures just stood there in the fog, not moving, not making a sound. I figured it was just the mist playing tricks on their eyes. You see shapes in fog that aren't really there. But then more reports came in. Different groups, different days, all describing the same thing. Extremely pale people, tall and thin, moving through the fog like they owned it. That's when people started disappearing. The first group was a family of 4 from Tennessee. They'd checked in at the ranger station on a Tuesday morning, planning to hike the cave trail. When they didn't check out by Thursday, we started searching. Found their camp exactly as they'd left it. Food still on the table, sleeping bags laid out, car keys in the tent. But no people. 4 days later, another group vanished. 2 couples from Asheville, experienced hikers who knew these trails better than some of my rangers. Same thing. Camp intact. People gone. No signs of struggle. I started mapping the disappearances, looking for patterns. Every single one happened near the cave systems. Every single one happened during heavy fog. And every single one left behind camps that looked like people had just stepped away for a minute and never came back. That's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The fog wasn't natural. It carried an electrical charge that killed radio signals. My equipment would work fine until I walked into one of those mist banks, then nothing but static. And the fog moved wrong. Against the wind, up hills instead of down, like something was controlling it. I requested backup and got Tommy Sequoia, another ranger with Cherokee blood who knew the old stories better than I did. Tommy took one look at my reports and got quiet. "Patty," he said, "I think we need to talk to my great-aunt Sarah." Sarah Owl was 93 years old and sharp as a hawk. She lived in a cabin on the reservation that had been in her family for 5 generations. When Tommy and I showed up with our files and our questions, she just nodded like she'd been expecting us. "The Moon-Eyed people," she said before we even finished explaining. "They're waking up." She told us things that weren't in any book or museum. The Moon-Eyed people weren't just a legend, they were real. Ancient people who lived in these mountains thousands of years before the Cherokee arrived. They were pale as bone, with huge eyes adapted for cave living. When the Cherokee came, they drove the Moon-Eyed people underground, sealing them in the deep caves. "They don't like the sun," Sarah said. "Burns them, so they learn to make their own darkness. The fog is their hunting ground." Tommy and I exchanged looks. This was either the ramblings of an old woman or the missing piece of our puzzle. "How do they make fog?" I asked, trying to keep the skepticism out of my voice. "Same way you make your breath visible on a cold morning," Sarah said. "But they've had thousands of years to perfect it. They work together, dozens of them, breathing out their mist until they can move without the sun touching them." The next morning we hiked up to Rough Ridge with full packs and emergency gear. I brought every piece of weather monitoring equipment I owned. If something was creating artificial fog, I was going to document it. We found the caves around noon, dark openings in the limestone that seemed to swallow our flashlight beams. The fog was light that day, just wisps around the cave mouths. I was taking readings when Tommy grabbed my arm. "Look at this," he whispered. Inside the first cave, maybe 20 feet from the entrance, someone had been living. Recent living. There were crude tools made from bone and stone, sleeping areas lined with animal fur, and scratch marks on the walls that looked almost like writing. But it was what we found deeper in that made my blood run cold. Hair, long strands of white hair so pale they were almost transparent. And on the cave walls, bits of skin that had rubbed off, skin so white it glowed in our flashlight beams. "Jesus," Tommy breathed. "How pale would someone have to be to leave skin behind just from brushing against rock?" That's when we heard the sound. It came from deep in the cave system. A clicking noise, like someone tapping rocks together. But there was a pattern to it, almost like language. And it was getting closer. We backed toward the cave entrance, trying to keep our light steady. The clicking grew louder, and with it came another sound. Breathing. Deep, steady breathing that echoed off the cave walls. I was about to suggest we get the hell out of there when the fog started pouring out of the cave. It came out like water from a burst pipe, thick and white and completely unnatural. In seconds, we were surrounded by mist so dense I couldn't see Tommy standing 3 feet away. "Stay close," I called out, but my voice sounded muffled and strange. That's when I saw the first one. It was standing maybe 10 feet away, just a shape in the fog at first. Then it moved closer, and I could make out details that will haunt me forever. It was human-shaped but wrong. Too tall, too thin, with arms that hung past its knees. Its skin was white as fresh snow, and its eyes... God, its eyes were huge, taking up half its face, with pupils so large they looked black. It was watching us. I fumbled for my flashlight and hit it with the full beam. The thing recoiled like I'd struck it with fire, throwing its hands over those huge eyes and making a sound like air escaping from a punctured tire. "Light!" I screamed to Tommy. "Use your light!" But when I turned around, Tommy was gone. The fog swirled around me, and I could hear more of that clicking sound coming from all directions. There were more of them out, there, moving through the mist like it was their natural element. I kept my flashlight beam moving, sweeping it in wide arcs. Every time it hit one of those pale figures, they would fall, back, but they never went far. They were hurting me, keeping me in the fog bank, away from the clear air and sunlight just 50 yards away. I was starting to panic when I heard a voice calling my name, a human voice, weak and scared. "Help me," it said. "Please help me." Following the voice, I stumbled through the fog until I found her, a young woman, maybe 25, sitting against a tree. She was alive, but something was terribly wrong with her. Her skin was white, not pale, not sick, white like paper, like milk, like those things in the cave. Her dark hair made her face look like a negative photograph. And her eyes. Her eyes were bigger than they should be, the pupils so dilated I could barely see any color around them. "Sarah Martinez," she whispered when I asked her name. "From the Tennessee group. We've been here. How long have we been here?" 5 days, I said, checking her pulse. It was slow but steady. "Feels longer," she said. "Much longer. They keep us in the caves. Feed us things that grow in the dark. They're changing us, making us like them." She tried to stand but stumbled, covering her eyes. "The light hurts now. Even your flashlight is too bright." I helped her to her feet, trying to figure out how to get us both out of there. But the fog was getting thicker, and I could hear more clicking sounds getting closer. "They communicate that way," Sarah whispered. "The clicking. They're deciding what to do with us." That's when I realized we weren't just dealing with some isolated cave dwellers. These things were organized. They had a plan, and we were part of it. Getting Sarah Martinez out of that fog bank was like escaping from a living nightmare. Every step toward clear air brought more of those pale figures closing in around us. I kept my flashlight moving constantly, creating a small bubble of safety in the white hell surrounding us. Sarah couldn't move fast. The light sensitivity was getting worse by the minute, and she kept stumbling like her legs weren't working right. When we finally broke through the edge of the fog into sunlight, she screamed and collapsed, covering her face with her hands. "It burns," she sobbed. "The sun burns." I radioed for emergency medical evacuation, but my radio was dead. Nothing but static. The fog was still interfering with electronics even though we were out of it. I had to half-carry Sarah down the mountain to my truck, and by the time we reached the hospital in Asheville, she was unconscious. The doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. Her blood work was normal, but her skin had no pigment left at all. Her eyes were so sensitive to light they had to keep her in a completely dark room. And she could only eat certain foods, raw meat, mushrooms, things that grew in darkness. "It's like she's adapted to live underground," one doctor told me. "But that's impossible. Humans can't change that fast." While Sarah was being treated, I went back to find Tommy. I called in every favor I had, got search teams with dogs and helicopters. We combed those caves for 2 days before finding him in a limestone chamber half a mile underground. He was alive, but changing. His skin had lost most of its color, and his eyes were starting to enlarge. But unlike Sarah, he was fighting it. He'd been exposing himself to light from his flashlight, burning his skin to slow the transformation. "They breathe on you," he whispered when we found him. "That's how they do it. Their breath changes you, makes you like them." I held my breath as long as I could, but... We got him to the surface, just as the sun was setting. That's when we saw them. The fog was rising from dozens of cave openings across Rough Ridge. But this time, I could see shapes moving inside it. Tall, pale figures emerging from underground. There were more of them than I'd imagined. Dozens, maybe hundreds. "They're coming up to hunt," Tommy said. "They only hunt when they can make enough fog to cover the whole area." As we watched, the fog began to spread down the mountainside like a slow avalanche. Wherever it touched, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. Plants withered. Animals fled. And, in the middle of it all, those pale figures moved with purpose. That night, 3 more hiking groups disappeared. I spent the next day at the hospital trying to understand what was happening to Sarah and Tommy. Sarah was getting worse. Her fingernails had fallen out and been replaced by something harder and sharper. She couldn't speak anymore, just made clicking sounds like the creatures in the caves. But Tommy was different. He was fighting the change with everything he had. When I brought him a UV lamp from the plant nursery, he held his hands under it until his skin blistered, but the whiteness stopped spreading. "Pain keeps me human," he said through gritted teeth. "The change doesn't hurt. That's the problem. It feels natural, like coming home. You have to fight it with pain." That evening, I went back to see Sarah Owl. I needed to understand what we were really dealing with. "They're not evil," she said when I described what I'd seen. "They're just trying to survive, but they need new people to keep their population going. They've been sleeping in the deep caves for generations, waiting. Waiting for what? For the surface to forget about them. For people to come into their territory without knowing the old protections." She taught me the traditional ways the Cherokee had used to keep the moon-eyed people underground. Bright lights, loud noises, and most importantly, fire. The moon-eyed people feared fire more than anything because it created light they couldn't control. But she also told me something that made my heart sink. If they've taken this many people, if they're changing them this fast, it means they're preparing for something big. They're building an army. The end. Next morning, I went back to Rough Ridge with a backpack full of emergency flares and the biggest flashlight I could find. I had to see what was really happening in those caves. The fog was thicker than ever, and it was spreading beyond the mountain. I could see it flowing down into the valleys where families lived, where children played in their backyards. Inside the cave system, I discovered the truth that still gives me nightmares. It wasn't just a few caves. It was a city. Miles of tunnels and chambers carved out of the living rock, filled with hundreds of pale figures living their ancient lives. And scattered throughout their underground world were the missing hikers in various stages of transformation. Some, like Sarah, were almost completely changed. Others were fighting it like Tommy had. But in the deepest chambers, I found something worse. People who had been transformed so long ago they'd become something else entirely. Leaders of the moon-eyed people directing the others, planning their return to the surface world. They knew I was there. I could hear the clicking communication spreading through the tunnels like wildfire. They were organizing, gathering, preparing to stop me from revealing their secret. That's when the fog in the caves began to move, flowing toward me like a living thing, carrying with it the breath that would change me into one of them. I ran. I ran through tunnels I'd never seen before, guided only by the faint current of air that meant an exit somewhere ahead. Behind me I could hear them coming, hundreds of feet on stone, clicking voices raised in something that sounded like a war chant. I was almost to the surface when they caught Tommy. I heard Tommy scream behind me in the tunnels, a sound that cut through the clicking voices like a knife. When I turned back with my flashlight, I saw them dragging him deeper into the cave system. A dozen pale figures with their hands on his arms and legs, moving with the practiced efficiency of a pack of hunters. "Run, Patty!" he shouted, before they pulled him around a bend in the tunnel. "Get to the surface. Use the flares." But I couldn't leave him. Tommy had saved my life a dozen times over the years, and he was fighting the transformation because he wanted to stay human. I had to try. Following the sound of their clicking voices, I went deeper into the cave city than I'd ever been before. The tunnels opened into vast chambers filled with pale figures, men, women, children, all of them white as bone with those huge dark eyes. They moved through their underground world like they'd been born to it, never stumbling in the absolute darkness. In the largest chamber, I found their leaders. They were old, moon-eyed people, transformed so long ago they barely looked human anymore. Their limbs were stretched out like spider legs. Their eyes took up most of their faces, and their skin was translucent. I could see veins and organs moving underneath. Tommy was in the center of the chamber, held down by a circle of the creatures. They were breathing on him in turns, their white breath visible in the cold cave air. With each breath, more of his natural skin color drained away. But he was still fighting. Every time they breathed on him, he would struggle, turning his face away, holding his breath until his lungs burned. The transformation was slower than it should have been because he wouldn't give in. One of the ancient leaders looked right at me. I don't know how it saw me in the darkness, but those huge eyes found me instantly. When it opened its mouth to speak, the voice was like wind through dry leaves. "Surface Walker," it said, "you have seen our city. You will join us or die here." "Let him go," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Take me instead." The thing that had once been human tilted its head. "We will take you both. The surface world has forgotten us for too long. It is time to reclaim what was ours before the Cherokee, before all the others who drove us into darkness." Around the chamber, hundreds of pale figures began to move closer. I could see more transformed hikers among them, people who had been missing for days or weeks, now serving their captors with blank, empty faces. "The fog will spread beyond this mountain," the leader continued, "to the valleys, to the towns. We will take the children first, then the adults. In one generation, there will be no more surface dwellers, only us." That's when I understood what I was really dealing with. This wasn't just about a few missing hikers. The moon-eyed people were planning to retake the surface world, one person at a time, using their fog to hunt and their breath to transform. I thought about Sarah Martinez in her dark hospital room, no longer human. I thought about the families in the valleys below, children playing in their yards, having no idea that pale figures in the mist were coming for them. I pulled out the first flare. The ancient leader's eyes went wide as I struck it against the rough cave wall. The red flame burst to life, and every moon-eyed person in the chamber recoiled like I'd exploded a bomb. Their clicking voices rose to a shriek as they threw their hands over their eyes and stumbled backward. But there were too many of them, and I only had 6 flares. "Tommy!" I shouted. "Move!" He rolled away from his captors while they were blinded by the flare light. Together we started running for the tunnel entrance, but the pale figures were already recovering, moving to block our escape. I lit the second flare and threw it into a group of them. They scattered, but more took their place. These creatures had lived in darkness for so long that any bright light was agony to them, but they were willing to endure it to stop us from escaping. In the tunnel, I lit the third flare. The confined space made the light even more effective. And we gained some distance, but I could hear them behind us, clicking to each other, coordinating their pursuit. "The fog!" Tommy gasped as we climbed toward the surface. "If we can get to clear air, they can't follow." But when we reached the cave entrance, we found the entire mountainside covered in white mist. The moon-eyed people had created a fog bank so thick it blocked out the sun completely. There was no clear air anywhere. They had turned the whole mountain into their hunting ground. I lit the fourth flare and held it high. In its red light, I could see pale figures surrounding us in the mist. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all standing motionless like they were waiting for orders. That's when I remembered what Sarah Owl had told me about their greatest fear. I pulled out the last two flares and struck them both at once, but instead of throwing them, I held them against the dry grass at the cave entrance. "What are you doing?" Tommy shouted. "Fire," I said as the grass caught and began to spread. "They're more afraid of fire than anything else." The flames raced through the dry vegetation, creating light that cut through the fog like a sword. Every moon-eyed person within 50 yards fled, their clicking voices raised in panic. But I had miscalculated. The fire spread faster than I expected, and the cave entrance was full of dry wood and debris. When the flames reached it, they ignited something else, methane gas that had been building up in the cave system. The explosion knocked us both to the ground and sealed the cave entrance with tons of fallen rock. As the dust settled, I realized what I had done. I had trapped hundreds of those creatures underground, but I had also cut off their escape route forever. The fog began to dissipate immediately. Without the moon-eyed people actively creating it, the unnatural mist couldn't sustain itself. For the first time in 3 weeks, I could see clear sky above Rough Ridge. Tommy and I stumbled down the mountain toward my truck, both of us injured, but alive. Behind us, I could hear sounds from others, our cave entrances, clicking voices filled with rage and despair as the moon-eyed people realized what had happened, but some of them were still out there, and they would remember what I had done. The official report blamed everything on toxic gas exposure in the caves. The Forest Service sealed every entrance they could find with concrete and declared the entire Rough Ridge area hazardous to human health. The missing hikers who survived were treated for chemical poisoning that had caused temporary skin discoloration and light sensitivity. Most of them recovered. Tommy got his normal skin color back after months of UV light therapy, though he kept the enhanced night vision that came with his partial transformation. Sarah Martinez wasn't so lucky. She was too far changed to ever live in normal light again. The state moved her to a special facility where she could live in darkness, though she never spoke another human word. 3 other victims were found in the sealed caves, transformed so completely that they couldn't survive on the surface. The official story was that they died from gas exposure before rescue teams could reach them. I kept my job, but I requested a transfer to the weather monitoring station. I spend my days now tracking atmospheric conditions across the Appalachian Mountains, looking for fog patterns that don't belong. Because what happened at Rough Ridge wasn't unique. I've found similar reports going back decades: missing hikers, unexplained fog banks, cave systems that get sealed off by geological instability. The moon-eyed people aren't gone. They're just sleeping again, waiting in caves throughout the mountain chain. Tommy stayed on as a ranger, but he carries more equipment now. Powerful flashlights, emergency flares, and a portable UV lamp that he claims is for biological research. We don't talk about what really happened, but sometimes, when we're monitoring the radio channels, we'll hear reports of unusual fog or missing campers, and we'll look at each other with the same thought. They're waking up again. Sarah Owl died 6 months after the incident, but before she passed, she taught us the old Cherokee protection rituals. We've shared them quietly with other rangers and search teams throughout the region. Ways to recognize unnatural fog, traditional methods for keeping pale things at bay, and most importantly, the knowledge that some caves should never be entered. The Cherokee have always known how to coexist with dangerous things. They drove the moon-eyed people underground once before, and they left us the knowledge to do it again if we have to. But I hope we never have to. Last month, I got a report from a ranger in Virginia about hikers describing albino people near a cave system in Shenandoah National Park. The area had been experiencing unusual fog conditions for 2 weeks. I packed my emergency kit and drove up there with Tommy. We found the caves before any hikers went missing, and we sealed them with concrete and posted hazard warnings. The fog cleared the next day. Sometimes you can stop these things before they start. Sometimes you can't. I'm telling you this story because you need to know what's out there. If you're hiking in the Appalachian Mountains and you encounter fog that doesn't belong, get out immediately. If you see pale figures moving in the mist, don't investigate. Run for sunlight and keep running. And if you're camping near caves and the fog starts rolling in thick and unnatural, pack up your gear and leave. Don't worry about looking foolish. Don't think about the money you spent on permits and reservations. Just remember that some things have been living in these mountains longer than humans have existed, and they're still here, still waiting in the darkness for people who don't know the old stories. The moon-eyed people are patient. They can sleep for generations between hunts. But they always wake up eventually, and when they do, they remember everyone's, he who has ever escaped from them. I check my locks twice every night, and I keep emergency flares in every room of my house, because I know they remember me. And someday, they might come looking. My name is Douglas Ironwolf, and I've been a park ranger on the Blue Ridge Parkway for 15 years. Most folks call me Doug. I'm 41 now, half Lakota on my mother's side, and I've seen enough in my time to know when something's not right in these mountains. Before the ranger service, I spent 8 years as military police. That taught me to notice details others miss, like how animals act before a storm, or when someone's lying about what really happened to their car. In my 15 years patrolling these roads, I've prevented 67 vehicle accidents. I know every curve, every blind spot, every place where tourists get themselves in trouble. I work the night shift mostly. Prefer it that way. Less chatter on the radio, fewer people asking questions, just me, my truck, and these old mountains that have been here since before anyone kept records. The parkway stretches 469 miles through Virginia and North Carolina, but my section covers the roughest 30 miles, the part they call Devil's Backbone. People always ask about that name. Truth is, nobody remembers exactly how it started. The road follows the spine of the ridge, winding like a snake's back through the peaks. At night, when fog rolls in thick, you can barely see 10 feet ahead. That's when the accidents happen. October of 1989 was different, though. I'd seen plenty of crashes in my time. Folks taking curves too fast, hitting deer, sliding on wet leaves. But this was something else. 7 accidents in 2 weeks, all at the same spot. Mile marker 217, the sharpest curve on my route. A place where the mountain drops 1,000 feet straight down, and there's no guardrail to stop you if you go over. What made these crashes strange wasn't just the location. It was what the survivors kept saying. The first was Martha Collins, a schoolteacher from Richmond. I found her Buick wrapped around a pine tree, froze, at end crumpled like paper. She was conscious when I got to her, bleeding from a head cut, but talking. That's when she told me about the cat. "Big as a horse," she kept saying while we waited for the ambulance. "Came out of nowhere, right onto my hood. Had to swerve or it would have come through the windshield." I figured she hit her head harder than she thought. Mountain lions live in these hills, sure, but they don't attack cars. They run from them. And they're not big as horses. I wrote it up as animal avoidance, vehicle versus tree. Standard stuff. Then came the second crash. Jerry Hoffman, truck driver from Tennessee. Same curve, same story. This time, I paid more attention to his truck. Deep scratches ran along the roof. 4 parallel lines like claw marks. But claw marks from what? The scratches went through the paint right down to the metal. I took pictures, measured them. 4 inches between each mark. That's bigger than any mountain lion I knew about. Jerry was shaken up bad. Kept lighting cigarettes with trembling hands. "Thing jumped right on top of my cab," he said. "Could hear it up there, walking around, scratching. Sounded like it was trying to get in. Had claws like knives." By the third accident, I couldn't ignore the pattern anymore. Same curve, same animal story, same claw marks. But now there was something else. Hair. Coarse black hair caught in the damaged metal, longer than mountain lion fur. I bagged samples and sent them to the state lab in Richmond. The fourth crash nearly killed a family from Pennsylvania. Mom, dad, 2 kids in the back seat. Their minivan flipped completely over. The father, Tom Brady, grabbed my arm when I leaned in to check on him. "It had eyes," he whispered. "Yellow eyes that glowed in my headlights. Looked right at me like it knew me, like it was waiting." That's when I knew we had a real problem on Devil's Backbone. Why? Whatever was causing these crashes. It wasn't random. It was hunting. The lab results came back on a Tuesday morning. I was drinking my 3rd cup of coffee when the phone rang. Dr. Sarah Chen. The wildlife biologist who ran the tests sounded confused. Doug, these hair samples you sent me, they're definitely feline, but they don't match any species in our database. The DNA shows markers consistent with big cats, but the hair structure is wrong. Too coarse, too long. And the size. She paused. Whatever left this hair is much larger than any mountain lion we have records of. I stared out my office window at the morning mist hanging over the ridgeline. How much larger? Based on the hair diameter and length, I'd estimate the animal weighs between 200 and 300 pounds. That's twice the size of the biggest mountain lion on record. After hanging up, I decided it was time to bring in help. Lisa Brightfeather worked wildlife patrol for the Park Service. She was Lakota like my mother's family, grew up in South Dakota before moving east. More importantly, she knew animal behavior better than anyone I'd worked with. I found her at the visitor center, updating trail condition reports. Lisa was 35, with long black hair she kept in a braid down her back. She had a way of reading tracks that seemed almost supernatural. If anyone could figure out what was stalking Devil's Backbone, it would be her. I need you to take a look at something, I told her, spreading the crash scene photos across her desk. Lisa studied the pictures carefully, running her finger along the scratch marks in each photo. Her expression grew more serious with each image. These aren't random, she said finally. Look at the spacing, the depth. This animal is attacking from above, probably dropping from the rock overhang onto moving vehicles. That takes intelligence and planning. What kind of animal hunts cars? She was quiet for a long moment. My grandmother told stories about something like this. Back on the reservation, we had legends about cats that weren't really cats. Shapes, hifters that could walk on 2 legs or 4. They called them different names in different tribes, but the Cherokee around here, they called it the Wampus Cat. I'd heard the name before, usually from old-timers telling ghost stories around campfires. I thought that was just folklore. So did I. Until now. Lisa pointed to one of the photos showing paw prints on a car roof. Look at these tracks, Doug. See how some show 4 pads, but others show what looks like toes? Like it was standing upright? The next night, we set up surveillance at mile marker 217. Lisa brought her wildlife cameras and motion sensors. I carried my service pistol and a spotlight strong enough to light up half the mountain. We parked 50 yards from the curve, hidden behind a stand of pine trees. The fog rolled in around 10 o'clock. Within minutes, visibility dropped to nothing. We sat in the darkness, listening to the wind through the trees and the distant sound of traffic on the interstate far below. There, Lisa whispered. I followed her gaze to the rock overhang above the curve. Something was moving up there, a shadow darker than the surrounding darkness. It moved wrong, too fluid for a regular animal. Sometimes on 4 legs, sometimes appearing to stand upright. Then a car came around the curve, a little Honda, probably some college kid heading home late. The shadow on the rocks shifted, crouched, and then leaped. The creature landed on the Honda's roof with a metallic crash that echoed through the canyon. The car swerved wildly, tires screaming on asphalt. Through my binoculars, I could see the animal clearly for the first time. It was massive, at least 8 feet long from nose to tail, with black fur that seemed to absorb light. The body was muscular like a panther, but wrong somehow. Too big, too intelligent. And when it turned its head toward our hiding spot, its eyes caught the car's headlights and glowed like amber fire. The Honda crashed into the guardrail. The creature looked at the wreckage for a moment, then turned and bounded back up the rocks with impossible speed. In seconds, it had vanished into the darkness. We found the driver unconscious but alive. Jessica Martinez, 19 years old, heading back to college after visiting her parents. The roof of her car was torn open like a can opener had worked on it. Claw marks ran from the windshield to the back window. When Jessica woke up in the ambulance, she grabbed my hand. "It spoke to me," she whispered. In my head. It said this was its road now. Lisa and I exchanged glances. Animals don't speak, not even in legends. But the look in Jessica's eyes told me she believed every word. "What else did it say?" I asked. "That it's been waiting a long time for people to come back to its mountain. And now that we're here..." She started crying. "It's so hungry." The attacks happened every night after that. Not just at mile marker 217 anymore. The creature was expanding its territory, claiming more of the Devil's Backbone curve by curve. Lisa and I started working double shifts, trying to patrol the entire section, but we couldn't be everywhere at once. By the end of the week, we'd lost 3 more people, not just injured, dead. The creature was getting bolder, more aggressive. The claw marks on the vehicles were deeper, more deliberate, like it was learning how to kill more efficiently. Lisa spent her days researching Cherokee folklore, talking to tribal elders, trying to understand what we were dealing with. What she found wasn't comforting. "The Wampus cat isn't just an animal," she explained as we prepared for another night patrol. "According to Cherokee tradition, it's a shapeshifter, a human who was transformed as punishment for breaking sacred laws. It's supposed to be immortal, getting stronger as it feeds." Feeds on what? Fear, pain, life force. The legends say it can steal memories from its victims, absorbing their experiences and knowledge. That, well, is how it gets smarter, more dangerous. That night, we decided to set a trap. Lisa positioned herself at the north end of the hunting zone while I took the south. We'd communicate by radio and try to herd the creature into the open where we could get a clear shot. The plan went wrong from the start. I was parked near mile marker 215 when my radio crackled. Lisa's voice came through, tight with fear. "Doug, it's here. It's right outside my truck. Stay calm. I'm coming to you." "No, don't. There's more than one. I can see at least 3 of them in the trees." My blood went cold. 3? They're not attacking. Just watching, like they're waiting for something. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Oh God, Doug. I think they're learning from us. They know we're hunting them, so now they're hunting us." I floored the accelerator, racing through the fog toward Lisa's position. The radio stayed silent. When I reached mile marker 218, I found her truck empty. The driver's door was torn off its hinges. Claw marks covered the hood and roof. Blood stained the seat. But Lisa was gone. I called for backup, started a search grid, did everything by the book. But deep down, I knew the book wouldn't help us anymore. We weren't dealing with an animal problem. This was something else entirely. I found Lisa 2 miles up the trail, unconscious against a pine tree. She was alive but badly hurt. 3 deep claw marks ran across her chest, and her eyes had changed. They were more yellow now, more like the creature's eyes. "It spoke to me too," she said when she woke up in the hospital. "Showed me things. Memories from all the people it's killed over the years. Doug, this thing has been hunting on Devil's Backbone since the road was built, maybe longer. What did it want? To show me what I'm becoming." She held up her hand. Her fingernails had grown longer, sharper. "It marked me, Doug. I can feel it changing me from the inside. Like an infection." The doctor said Lisa's wounds would heal, but I could see the changes happening. Her reflexes were faster. Her night vision was better. She moved differently, more like a predator than a person. And sometimes, when she thought I wasn't looking, she'd bare her teeth like she was practicing how to use fangs. That's when I realized the creature wasn't just killing people. It was recruiting them, building a pack. I had maybe 24 hours before I lost Lisa forever, and after that, there would be 2 creatures hunting on Devil's Backbone. Then 4, then 8. I had to end this before it spread. I called Joseph Crow Dog at 6 in the morning. He was an elder from the Cherokee Reservation in North Carolina, someone Lisa had mentioned in her research. If anyone knew how to fight a Wampus cat, it would be him. "You're dealing with something that should have been put to rest generations ago," he told me over the phone. His voice was gravelly, weathered by age and tobacco. "My great-grandfather told me about this creature. It's been bound to that mountain for over a century, but something has awakened it. How do we stop it? Fire, sacred fire blessed by Cherokee medicine, but not just any fire. It has to be prepared correctly, with the right prayers, the right herbs, and you have to face it in its own territory. It won't leave the mountain willingly." Crow Dog drove up from North Carolina that afternoon. He was 80 years old, but moved like a man half his age. His weathered hands carried a leather pouch filled with sage, cedar, and other plants I didn't recognize. "Your partner," he said, studying Lisa through her hospital room window. "She's already halfway changed. If we don't complete the ritual tonight, she'll be lost." Lisa was getting worse. Her temperature had spiked to 104 degrees, but she wasn't sweating. Her fingernails were now full claws, and she'd started growling in her sleep. The nurses were getting nervous. "I'm coming with you," she said when I told her the plan. "Isa, you're sick. You need to—" "I'm not sick, Doug. I'm changing. And I can feel what it wants, where it's going to be. You need me." She stood up, and I could see the new strength in her movements. "Besides, this thing is in my head now. If you don't stop it tonight, it'll have access to everything I know about police procedures, patrol routes, backup protocols. It'll be unstoppable." Crow Dog spent an hour blessing the sage and cedar, singing prayers in Cherokee that echoed off the hospital walls. Then he handed me a small bundle of the sacred plants. "Light this when you see the creature," he instructed. "The smoke will weaken it, make it vulnerable. But you have to get close. The blessing only works within 50 feet. What about weapons?" He reached into his pouch and pulled out 3 bullets. They were silver, carved with Cherokee symbols. "These will hurt it, maybe even kill it if you hit it in the heart. But remember, this creature has the memories of every person it's killed. It knows how to fight, how to think like a human. Don't underestimate it." We reached Devil's Backbone just after sunset. The fog was already rolling in, thick as soup. Lisa guided us to mile marker 217, the original hunting ground. She moved through the darkness like she could see perfectly, which scared me more than I wanted to admit. "It's here," she whispered, pointing to the rock overhang. "Can you feel it?" I couldn't feel anything but cold mountain air and my own fear. But then I heard it, a low growling that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The creature was circling us, just outside the range of my flashlight. "Light the sage," Lisa said urgently. "It's coming." I struck a match and touched it to the blessed herbs. Sweet smoke rose into the air, and immediately the growling stopped. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze. Laughter. Human laughter, but with an "ands," a small undertone that was completely wrong. "You brought me a gift," a voice said from the darkness. It sounded like a man speaking, but the words came from too high up, from the rocks above us. "The woman is almost mine now. Soon she'll hunt with me, and we'll own these mountains forever." The creature dropped from the overhang and landed 20 feet away. In the light of my flashlight and the sacred smoke, I could see it clearly for the first time. It was enormous, easily 8 feet long and probably 300 pounds. Black fur covered a body that was muscled like a panther but built wrong, too long, too tall. The head was cat-like but with human intelligence in the yellow eyes, and when it opened its mouth, the teeth were both fangs and human molars, designed for tearing and chewing. But the worst part was when it stood up on its hind legs. The creature rose to nearly 7 feet tall, balancing perfectly on legs that bent wrong like a human trying to walk like a cat. In that moment, I understood what I was really looking at. This had been a person once, someone who'd been changed, transformed into something that was neither human nor animal, but a horrible combination of both. "I was the first," it said, speaking aloud now in a voice that sounded like gravel in a cement mixer. "A Cherokee medicine man who broke sacred laws, tried to use dark magic to gain power over death itself. The spirits punished me, bound me to this mountain, made me into this form. But they didn't expect me to like it." The creature began to circle us, moving sometimes on 4 legs, sometimes on 2. For 100 years, I waited, alone, hungry, forgotten. Then you built your road through my territory, brought me endless streams of prey. Now I'm strong enough to make others like me, starting with her. Lisa stepped forward, and for a terrifying moment I thought she was going to join the creature. But instead, she pulled out her service pistol and aimed it at the wampus cat's head. "I choose to stay human," she said, and fired. The silver bullet took the creature in the shoulder, spinning, flying it around. It screamed, Not an animal sound, but the cry of a person in terrible pain. Black blood splattered the rocks, and where it hit, the stone began to smoke. But the creature didn't die. Instead, it got angry. It charged us on all fours, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. I dove one way, Lisa dove the other. The wampus cat slammed into a pine tree, splintering the trunk with the impact. I rolled to my feet and fired twice. One bullet missed, but the other caught the creature in the chest. It stumbled, growled, and then began to change. The black fur started to fade, revealing human skin underneath. The body shrank, became more human-shaped. For a moment, I could see what the creature had been before its transformation. A Cherokee man, probably in his 30s, with traditional tattoos covering his arms. "The sacred fire!" Lisa shouted. "Now!" I held the burning sage toward the creature. The smoke swirled around it, and wherever the blessed smoke touched, the thing's form became more unstable. Sometimes it was a giant cat, sometimes a man, sometimes something horrible in between. "You cannot destroy me," it gasped, speaking in English now instead of that gravelly animal voice. "I am bound to this mountain. Even if you banish this form, I will return." "Maybe," I said, stepping closer with the sacred fire. "But not in our lifetime." The smoke from the blessed sage grew thicker, surrounding the creature like a tornado. It began to scream, a sound that was part human, part animal, and completely filled with rage and pain. The yellow eyes dimmed. The massive body began to fade like morning mist. "I will remember," it whispered as it dissolved. "I will remember all of you." Then it was gone. Just smoke and the smell of burned sage and the sound of wind through the pine trees. Lisa collapsed against a rock, breathing heavily. When I checked, the claw marks on her chest were healing already. More importantly, her eyes were brown again, fully human. "Is it over?" she asked. I looked around at the quiet mountain, the empty road, the normal darkness that wasn't filled with glowing eyes and supernatural hunger. For now. We never had another supernatural incident on Devil's Backbone. The accidents stopped completely at mile marker 217. Tourists drive through safely now, never knowing what used to hunt them in the fog. But sometimes, on nights when the mist rolls in thick and I'm patrolling alone, I think I hear something moving in the rocks above the road. Something big, something patient, something waiting. Lisa transferred to another section of the parkway. She said she needed a fresh start, but I think the real reason was that she could still feel the creature's influence in these mountains. Some changes, once made, never completely go away. As for me, I keep Joseph Crowdog's phone number in my wallet, and I always carry a small bundle of blessed sage in my glove compartment, just in case the wampus cat decides to come home.